Welcome, dear horror listener. You're tuning in to Frost Radio, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Whether you've been with us for a long time or just found this channel tonight, thank you for joining me for another chilling tale. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and means more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, what brought you here, or even what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support keeps this channel alive, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now let's get into today's horror story. Snow rattled against the windshield like 1,000 dry bones being poured from the sky. Hank Mercer leaned closer to the steering wheel, squinting through the blur of frost and motion. His 18-wheeler rumbled steadily along the remote Alaskan highway, tires crunching over icy asphalt, headlights cutting 2 narrow tunnels through the night. In the cab, the heater wheezed and the faint hum of old country music dribbled from the radio, though the static almost swallowed it whole. Hank sipped his coffee from a dented thermos, steam briefly fogging the air before vanishing into the dark chill. He was a big man, the kind of frame years of long-haul driving built, broad-shouldered, worn hands, a face cracked with lines from sleepless nights and bad weather. He told himself this was just another run, another lonely stretch of road, though. Deep down, he felt the weight of the miles pressing against his bones. Ahead, a dim fluorescent glow broke the endless black, one of the last gas stations before the mountain pass. Hank pulled the truck into the gravel lot, headlights sweeping over crooked pumps and a sagging awning whose bulbs flickered in protest against the storm. The building looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s, the paint peeling, the sign half burnt out. Inside the small office, the air smelled faintly of kerosene and stale cigarettes. A thin man stood behind the counter, pale and hollow-eyed, his expression unreadable. He wore a grease-stained flannel and fingerless gloves, his breath fogging faintly despite the weak heater glowing in the corner. Hank nodded politely while filling his tank, the pump clicking with sluggish resistance. "Quiet night," Hank muttered, his voice muffled under the hiss of snow. The attendant looked at him for a long, uncomfortable moment before replying. "It gets quiet out there," he said, his tone low and flat. "Past the pass. Some say too quiet." Hank frowned, tugging his jacket tighter. "What's that supposed to mean?" The man shook his head quickly as though regretting he'd spoken at all. His eyes darted toward the road beyond the pumps. "Just don't linger when the silence starts. That's all." Hank gave a short laugh to hide the unease worming its way into his chest. "I'll keep that in mind." But the attendant didn't laugh. He just stared, his knuckles whitening against the counter. Hank finished filling the tank, climbed back into his cab, and pulled out onto the road. In his side mirror, he saw the station shrink away, its flickering lights devoured by the snowstorm, until only blackness remained. The highway stretched ahead like a vein through the frozen wilderness. Snow whipped against the windshield, drumming softly, a rhythm steady enough to lull him into a half-trance. The road was empty, utterly abandoned, as though he were the last living thing in the world. He switched the radio station, catching only static and garbled voices. He settled for silence, the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires the only sound. The mountains loomed closer, jagged silhouettes against a starless sky. Frost gathered, on the inside of the glass, his own reflection faint and ghostly in the rear view. He rubbed a hand across his stubbled jaw and took another sip of coffee, though it had gone bitter and cold. For a time, everything was normal. Just another lonely haul through Alaskan winter. His thoughts wandered to his daughter back in Anchorage, her birthday coming up in a week. He promised her a new bike. He imagined her face lighting up when she saw it. That warmth kept him steady against the cold gnawing through the seams of the cab. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, the attendant's warning lingered, threading itself into the rhythm of the night. The silence was thick, denser than it should be. Even the storm seemed muted, the wind softened as though the world were holding its breath. Hank tried to shake the feeling off. Then, in the rearview mirror, he caught the faint glow of headlights. 2 bright orbs shone far behind, cutting through the swirling snow. Relief touched him. Finally, another traveler, another sign he wasn't the only one alive on this stretch of road. The lights grew closer, steady and unwavering, and Hank eased his rig to the right to let the vehicle pass. But the car never did. He drove for 10 minutes, the glow fixed at the same distance. Always behind. Never gaining. Never falling back. Hank frowned, twisting in his seat to get a better look, but the snow blurred everything to haze. He blinked and turned back forward, telling himself it was nothing. Probably another trucker keeping a safe following distance. But something about the lights felt wrong. Too bright, too cold. They didn't flicker the way headlights normally did in snow. And there was no shape of a vehicle, just light suspended in the storm. He shook his head, gripping the wheel tighter. "You're just tired," he muttered to himself. "Need sleep, that's all." Still, he kept checking the mirror. Every glance, those lights remained. Every mile, they neither approached nor disappeared. His chest tightened with each passing moment. The silence inside the cab thickened, pressing against his eardrums until even the sound of the engine seemed to fade. Hours, or minutes, he couldn't tell, slipped by. His mind felt slow, fogged, but his pulse pounded hard. Once he flicked on the CB radio, desperate for another voice. Static clawed at him, screeching, bending into faint whispers he couldn't make out. He slammed it off, his throat dry. The lights suddenly blinked out. Hank jerked in his seat, scanning the mirror, twisting in panic. Nothing. Only blackness swallowed the highway behind him. He exhaled sharply, shoulders sagging. Maybe it had been a trick of the storm all along. Maybe. A shape darted across the road ahead. He slammed the brakes, tires screaming, the massive truck skidding sideways on ice. Coffee splashed across the cab as the rig shuddered to a halt. Hank's breath steamed violently in the air as he stared into the storm. Nothing. No deer, no moose, no figure. Just white snow swirling in chaotic spirals. He sat frozen, knuckles white against the wheel, chest heaving. Then, in the mirror, the lights were back, closer. Much closer. Hank's heart punched against his ribs. He floored the accelerator, the rig groaning forward, tires spitting ice. The lights followed, perfectly in sync, gliding effortlessly across the frozen road. He pushed harder, speedometer needle trembling as the truck barreled up the mountain pass. The glow behind him grew, filling the mirror, until it was almost blinding. And then he saw it. Not headlights, not a car. The light was suspended, shapeless, glaring like the eyes of something massive that had no body. It hovered just above the road, and though it made no sound, Hank swore he felt it breathe. Slow, steady gusts that rattled his chest more than the storm did. He tried not to look, but the mirror pulled his eyes like a magnet. For the briefest instant, he thought he saw a figure standing within the glow, tall, too tall, limbs too long. Its face smeared, featureless, yet somehow watching him with unbearable weight. The radio flickered to life, bursting with static and fractured words. "Don't stop, don't listen, keep moving," Hank shouted hoarsely into the cab, though there was no one to hear. He swerved around a curve, the trailer groaning dangerously, snow spraying into the void beyond the guardrail. The glow surged forward, closer, closer, until it filled the cab with white, and then it vanished. Darkness. Silence. Hank gasped, slowing, his body trembling violently. His breath rasped in his ears. He forced himself to glance in the mirror. Nothing. No lights. No glow. Only the black road swallowed in storm. He drove on, numb, every nerve screaming for escape. His thoughts were scattered, half dream, half nightmare. Hours bled into minutes, time itself slipping like ice under his wheels. Eventually, the storm eased, stars faintly piercing the clouds. The mountains fell away, and the faint outline of anchorage shimmered far below. Civilization, safety. Hank pulled into a rest stop just outside the city. The truck rumbled to stillness. He sat there for a long time, forehead pressed to the wheel, trying to breathe. The world seemed normal again. The hiss of wind, the faint glow of streetlights, the murmur of distant engines. He told himself it had been exhaustion, a trick of the storm, his mind playing games after too many lonely miles. But when he finally gathered the courage to check his rearview mirror again, his blood froze. There, faint against the glass, two pale lights glimmered in the distance. And no matter how long he stared, they didn't fade. The road stretched endlessly before him, a silver ribbon of ice illuminated by his headlights, swallowed quickly by the black expanse of night. Henry Barker had been driving for nearly 10 hours without rest, his eyelids fluttering heavier with each passing mile. He was alone, as he often was these days, just a man, his truck, and the forgotten backroads of Alaska. His cab smelled faintly of strong coffee and the lingering smoke of cheap cigarettes, though he hadn't lit one in hours. The radio whispered low through static, a late-night blues station just barely reaching him in this frozen wilderness. The heater hummed warmly, though thin lines of frost were beginning to creep in at the corners of the windshield. Snow whipped across the asphalt in little spirals, twisting like dancers in the beams of his headlights. His thermos sat in the cup holder, steam rising in ghostly tendrils from the cap each time he unscrewed it. He took another sip, the bitter liquid grounding him just enough to focus on the curves of the road ahead. Somewhere out there in the white wilderness, a wolf howled faintly, carried on the wind. Henry rubbed at his neck, tired muscles groaning from hours of being clenched to the wheel. His wife had begged him to take the safer route south, but he'd promised the shortcut would shave hours off the trip. She didn't understand the urgency. The contract was due tomorrow morning in Anchorage, and if he didn't deliver, the company would drop him. It wasn't just his job. It was their mortgage, their bills, everything. He couldn't afford to stop, but his eyes begged him to. When the little green mile marker appeared on the right side of the road, Henry sighed, with relief. It wasn't a town or even a gas station, but there was a small plowed shoulder ahead, just wide enough for a truck to pull over without sliding into a ditch. He flicked his blinker, the orange light weak against the snowy dark, and carefully guided the truck onto the icy gravel. His tires crunched over hardened snow, and when the engine finally settled into silence, the world outside pressed in heavy and absolute. For the first time in hours, he leaned back, stretching his arms, the leather seat groaning beneath his weight. Steam from his breath fogged the windshield quickly. He rolled it down just a crack to let in a bite of the night air, sharp and metallic in his lungs. The silence was immense, only the soft ticking of the engine cooling filling the void. For a moment, Henry let himself drift in that stillness, staring out at the pale moonlight sliding over drifts of snow, and thought maybe, just maybe, he'd close his eyes for 10 minutes. But then came the wind. At first, it was ordinary enough. A low whistle, the kind that shakes bare tree limbs and hums through cracks in forgotten barns. It moved across the snowfield with a restless energy, rustling through invisible corridors. Henry thought little of it. This far north, the wind was constant, always shifting. He pulled his jacket tighter around him and tilted the seat back. The sound, however, began to change. What had been a whistle sharpened, lifted, and curled in pitch until it resembled something almost human. A high keening, faint like the drawn-out moan of someone calling from far away. His brow furrowed. He sat up straighter, listening. The sound dipped low again, then rose, catching on itself like a throat gasping. It was no longer the voice of the wind. It was the voice of something trapped inside it. Henry shook his head and turned up the radio. Static swallowed the faint blues song, then stuttered and died altogether. The speakers popped, hissing like breath. He smacked the dash. Dead. The cab felt instantly too quiet. And still that strange noise threaded its way through the storm. Long, broken wails, swelling and collapsing, as if dozens of unseen mouths were screaming at once. The hair on his arms prickled despite the heater still blowing warm air. He checked the mirrors, seeing only the white haze of snow swept across the asphalt. He laughed nervously under his breath. "You're tired, Henry." "That's all, just the wind." Yet the longer he sat, the clearer it became that there were words hidden in that howl. Not just noise, not just chance. Shapes of syllables rose between gusts, rising in unison before dissolving into the roar. Crying, begging, screaming. The glass of the windshield quivered faintly as if touched by invisible hands. Henry's pulse quickened. He leaned forward, squinting into the storm. "Hello?" He called without meaning to, his own voice trembling in the silence between gusts. No answer came, at least not in words. The reply was another chorus of screams, loud enough now that his side windows rattled violently, the truck rocking slightly on its shocks. He fumbled for the ignition, desperate for the reassuring growl of the engine. His fingers slipped once, twice before he jammed the key in. The starter whined, caught, then roared to life. The headlights sliced into the snow, beams bending around the swirling white. The sound outside rose in fury, a howling chorus of agony that slammed against the truck like fists. And then he heard it, a single, distinct impact above his head. A hollow thud on the roof of the cab. His eyes shot upward instinctively, though there was nothing to see but the sagging fabric of the interior ceiling. Another pounding blow followed, then another, as if someone was scrambling across the top of his truck, striking metal with furious, desperate force. Henry's throat went dry. He slammed the truck into gear, tires spitting slush as the vehicle lurched forward. The pounding followed, a rhythm of impacts that matched his acceleration, faster and faster as he pressed harder on the gas. His headlights danced over the curves of the road, shadows leaping with each twist. The cab shook under the repeated blows, the roof denting faintly with each strike. His breathing grew ragged. Every nerve screamed to look up, to crane his head and see through the sunroof he wished he didn't have. But some deeper instinct told him not to, told him that whatever was above, it should not be seen by human eyes. The chorus of screams outside surged, deafening, so loud the steering wheel trembled beneath his grip. He pressed the accelerator until the engine roared, the truck swerving dangerously on black ice. He could hear nails or claws scraping across the roof, dragging long grooves in the metal. The pounding shifted, moving toward the rear, then back toward the front, as though the thing was crawling, circling, deciding where to enter. "Not real, not real," Henry chanted, voice breaking. His hands were slick with sweat despite the freezing air outside. He glanced at the side mirror and nearly swerved off the road. For a split second, just long enough to register, a pale face glared back at him in the glass. Hollow sockets where eyes should have been. A mouth stretched wide, far wider than natural, as if tearing itself open to scream. And then it was gone, swallowed by the blur of snow. Henry cried out and jerked the wheel, tires shrieking as he narrowly avoided sliding into a ditch. The pounding on the roof grew wild, frantic, matching the ragged pounding of his heart. His chest heaved with every breath. He could see nothing but snow, hear nothing but those screams and the metallic torture above his head. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence slammed down harder than the noise ever had. No pounding, no screaming, only the steady hum of the engine and his own ragged breaths. The road stretched empty and endless ahead of him, serene once more under the pale moonlight. Henry dared a glance upward. The roof of his cab bore faint dents, shallow but undeniable, scattered across the metal like the prints of fists. He swallowed hard, forcing his gaze back to the road. His hands shook uncontrollably on the wheel. For another 20 miles he drove without daring to slow, headlights carving tunnels of safety through the snow. Each passing shadow threatened to move. Each gust of wind whispered just enough like a voice to set his teeth on edge. But nothing returned. Nothing struck the roof again. When he finally pulled into a gas station at the edge of a small town, his body was trembling with exhaustion and fear. The attendant eyed him curiously as Henry staggered out, glancing nervously at the top of his truck. "You all right, buddy?" the man asked, frowning. Henry opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he say? That the wind had screamed at him? That something had been on his roof trying to claw its way in? He forced a tight smile. Yeah, just the wind. But as he turned back toward his truck, his stomach dropped. There, Streaked across the frost of his roof were 5 long, parallel grooves, deep, blackened, etched straight into the metal, as though something with inhuman hands had clung there for miles. Henry looked away quickly, but the sound still echoed faintly in his memory. The screaming wind, carrying voices that were not wind at all. He never drove that route again, and yet sometimes on quiet nights when the world is still and the air cuts cold against the skin, Henry swears he hears it again. The cries rising, syllables twisted in the storm, calling from just beyond the glass. He prays it is only memory. But the question claws at him still. What if the thing on his roof never left at all? The night was bitter, the kind that clung to the bones no matter how high the heater was turned. Nate tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his gloved hands flexing as the tires hummed against the frozen asphalt. Beside him, Chris balanced, a styrofoam cup of coffee, steam fogging the passenger window where he had been tracing little doodles in the condensation. The two of them had been driving for hours, cutting through the lonely heart of Alaska's winter wilderness, where the forest pressed tight on either side and the mountains seemed to lean closer with every mile. They had stopped earlier at a half-lit gas station, the kind that looked abandoned until you saw the flicker of fluorescent bulbs and the old man at the counter with eyes too sharp for his age. He'd muttered about the pass as they'd fueled up, as if the road itself carried weight. Chris had laughed it off, whispering as they climbed back into the car that the man seemed like he belonged in a ghost story. Nate, tired and focused on the drive, hadn't replied. But now the memory of those words sat heavier than he'd admit, layered beneath the steady thrum of the car's engine and the classic rock station hissing softly through static. The windshield wipers squeaked across the glass, fighting the fine mist of snow that drifted across their path. The world outside was hushed, smothered under blankets of ice and shadow. From the driver's seat, Nate could see his own reflection in the windshield, pale and drawn, caught in the glow of the headlights. Chris hummed along to the music, sipping his coffee, legs tucked up like he was trying to make himself smaller against the cold. For a brief moment, it all felt simple, almost comforting. The rhythm of the road, the faint orange glow of the dash, the steam curling from the cup between them. They had fallen into the lull of the journey, the sameness of endless miles, when Chris broke the silence. "You know the story, right?" he asked, still watching the snow streaking past. "About this stretch of road? The one they call the Cursed Pass?" Nate sighed, half a smile on his lips. "You mean the kind of story the old guy at the gas station would tell?" Chris chuckled. "Exactly. Supposedly people vanish out here. Cars skid off even when the roads are dry. Some say you see things in the snow, like the past never really lets go." "Yeah, well," Nate muttered, adjusting the heater vents. "If ghosts want to freeze their asses off out here, they're welcome to it." Their laughter filled the car, a sharp relief against the gnawing silence outside. The sound felt bigger than it should have, echoing back against the glass. Nate pressed the gas a little harder, leaning into the curve of the pass, headlights carving their way through the darkness. The landscape rolled by, quiet and unchanging, until something shifted. The radio hissed, just for a second, breaking through a guitar riff with a burst of static like a whisper too fast to catch. Chris glanced at the dial but said nothing. Nate kept his eyes on the road, though the sound raised a prickling along his neck. The pavement had been dry a moment ago, black and crisp under the sweep of the lights. But as they rounded the bend, Nate's stomach lurched. The road glistened like glass. A sheen of ice stretched across the pass, sudden and absolute, glimmering as if laid there deliberately. "Shit!" Nate's voice cracked as the tires shrieked. The car fishtailed, spinning sideways as if the road had disappeared from under them. Chris's coffee flung against the dash, a dark stain spreading across the vents. The headlights swung wildly, cutting across the towering pines, dizzying, until the world righted itself with a violent jerk. They skidded to a stop at the shoulder, hearts pounding, breath fogging the air inside the car. Nate's knuckles were white against the wheel. Chris was swearing under his breath, pressing a palm against the dash as though that could still the quiver in his hands. The road should have been dry. They had both seen it, crisp black under the weak glow of the moonlight, then suddenly transformed into a slick mirror of ice. The pass was notorious for snow, yes, but the night had been clear, the air dry. This wasn't natural. For a long moment, neither spoke. The engine idled, the headlights stabbing into the woods. The silence outside pressed closer, heavier than before. Then Chris's voice cracked the stillness. "Look," he whispered, pointing out the windshield. At first, Nate saw nothing, just the endless shimmer of ice, the road stretching empty and wrong. Then his eyes focused, and the breath hitched in, his throat, footprints. They were sharp and deliberate, pressed deep into the slick surface. Human footprints, bare, no shoes, no boots, just the curve of arches, the splay of toes. They led straight across the pass, cutting into the tree line as if someone had walked there moments before. Nate leaned forward, searching the forest's edge. Nothing moved, only the sway of branches in the faint wind. "How the hell?" His voice broke off. "There's no other tracks," Chris said quickly. He was right. No car tires, no skid marks but their own. Just those footprints stark against the sheen of ice that shouldn't even exist. For a while, they both stared. The heater hummed, blowing air that seemed suddenly too warm against their faces. Nate swallowed, throat dry. "It's a trick," he muttered finally. "The ice. It's messing with the reflection." But his words carried no weight. The prints remained, impossible and undeniable, leading into the endless dark of the forest. They should have left then. They should have driven on, ignoring what they'd seen. Instead, the silence stretched, and with it came the gnawing pull of curiosity. Chris shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on the tree line. What if someone's out there? In this cold, barefoot? Nate shook his head, but doubt pressed in anyway. What if someone was stranded? What if those prints were the last sign before they disappeared into the woods forever? The thought dug deep, heavy and sour. Nate gripped the wheel, forcing himself to breathe steady. The radio hissed again, faint, carrying what almost sounded like a word before it dissolved back into static. Something was wrong on this road, the cursed pass. The old man's eyes at the gas station, the sudden black ice that shouldn't exist, and now footprints where no one should walk. The forest loomed ahead, waiting. The engine's low hum was the only sound keeping Thomas company as the night pressed in around his truck. He'd been on the road for hours, hauling timber down the long stretch of the Dalton Highway, a route most men avoided once the snow began to fall heavy. His cab smelled faintly of diesel, coffee, and pine sawdust that clung stubbornly to his clothes. On the dashboard, a half-empty thermos rattled against loose change whenever he hit a bump. The heater pushed out warmth that fogged the lower corners of the windshield, but still his fingers brushed the vent for reassurance as though coaxing more heat from the machine. He was glad he wasn't alone tonight. Up ahead, 3 vehicles rolled, steadily in formation, 2 rigs and what looked like a pickup. Their red taillights blinked softly in the fog, pulsing in unison like the beat of a heart. He'd caught them hours earlier near a gas stop in Coldfoot, falling in behind them with quiet gratitude. The Dalton had a way of swallowing men whole if they drove it alone too long. But with those lights ahead, glowing dots tethering him to other travelers, the road felt less like a maw and more like a tunnel leading somewhere safe. A cassette tape, word in the player, muffled country ballads about heartbreak and distance crackling through the static. He drummed his thumb on the steering wheel in rhythm, taking comfort in the familiar drawl. Outside, snow hissed across the asphalt like sandpaper, the kind of dry flakes that glittered like glass dust in his high beams. Every so often, a shape of a tree emerged out of the whiteness, hunched beneath its weight of snow before disappearing again into the gray. The road stretched endlessly, a ribbon laid out beneath a sky so black it felt bottomless. And yet, as long as those red lights glowed in the fog ahead, Thomas felt tethered. The convoy drove steady, never too fast, never slowing without reason. Their exhaust plumes rose like ghostly columns, swallowed almost instantly by the mist curling down from the hills. He matched their pace without thinking, as though they were pulling him along by invisible cords. His own breath occasionally fogged the inside of the cab, caught in the glow of the dash lights, vanishing just as quickly as it appeared. For hours, nothing broke the monotony but the rhythm of wheels on frozen road and the measured blink of those red lights. It was almost peaceful. But then the fog thickened. It crept slowly at first, an extra veil drawn across the windshield. The further he drove, the more it felt alive, pressing closer, swallowing the trees, erasing the road's edges. The moon was gone, the stars buried behind a woolen blanket. His headlights stretched no further than a dozen yards before being devoured. Whole. The convoy pressed on. Thomas leaned forward, eyes fixed on those taillights. They grew dimmer, smeared shapes in the gray, but still they pulsed. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, knuckles pale in the glow from the dash. His wipers screeched against gathering frost. The radio crackled with static, swallowing the singer's voice mid-lyric before offering only faint distortion, as though another station, something faint, something whispering, was trying to break through. He turned the knob. The static only deepened, buzzing through the speakers like bees. He clicked. It off. Silence folded in, broken only by the grinding of his tires and the hiss of snow. And then, the taillights were gone. Not faded, not dimmed, just gone. Thomas blinked hard, leaning forward until his chest nearly touched the wheel. He scanned the fog, waiting for the convoy's shape to emerge again. Nothing. He eased off the accelerator, coasting. The road stretched out blankly before him, only his own beams cutting through the white void. Christ. His voice was small, muffled in the cab. They couldn't have just vanished. Not three vehicles, not all at once. He drove slower, eyes searching desperately for the glow of brake lights, the shimmer of chrome, anything. He rolled past the point where he swore he should have caught up to them, but the road was empty. No tracks carved the snow, no divots where tires had churned up ice. Nothing. It was as if they had never been there at all. A shiver crawled down his spine. He tapped the brakes lightly, and the truck hissed in response, slowing. His eyes darted to the mirrors, but the fog clung too thickly to reveal anything beyond a pale halo of his own lights. He reached for the CB mic out of habit, thumb pressing down the button. Convoy ahead, you boys got your ears on? This is Timberline 2. Static. He clicked it again. Anyone up ahead, copy? The radio hissed, a faint crackle, then silence. He exhaled slowly, pulse drumming harder now. His hand dropped the mic, fingers trembling just enough to make the cord sway. He pressed back on the accelerator, letting the truck pick up speed again, but he couldn't shake it. The utter emptiness of the road where just moments before three whole vehicles had been. As the minutes dragged on, the unease thickened. Every sound seemed sharper. The clank of loose chains against the trailer, the faint rattle in the glove box, the whine of the engine fighting the grade. He found himself glancing in the mirrors again and again, half expecting headlights to bloom. Suddenly behind him, or worse, to catch a shape moving in the fog that wasn't a car at all. At one point, the radio clicked alive on its own. Just a short burst of sound, a crackle, then something like a whisper so faint it could have been static. Thomas's hand darted for the dial, snapping it off. He swore under his breath, glancing at the empty road once more. The fog pressed tighter, the world outside collapsing into a circle no larger than his beams. Snow whispered across the glass. Every muscle in his body tensed as though bracing for something to emerge from that whiteness. A figure, a wreck, anything. But nothing came. Then, in the corner of his eye, a flicker, a red glow, faint, pulsing. His heart leapt, relief flooding him as he leaned forward. The taillights, they were back. But no, not quite. They hovered further than they should, two glowing dots suspended in the mist. He pressed the accelerator, the engine growling as he tried to close the distance. The lights didn't grow nearer. They simply floated ahead, unwavering. He frowned, sweat beating cold on his temple. He pressed harder. The truck shuddered, speed climbing. Still, the lights never came closer. And then, impossibly, they began to rise. Up, higher, drifting into the mist until they were above the tree line. Two perfect glowing dots burning through the fog like eyes. Thomas slammed the brakes, his rig screeching, tires grinding against the icy road. His chest hit the wheel, breath knocked out of him. He stared through the glass, heart thundering, so hard he thought it might split. The lights blinked out. The road was empty again. Silence pressed in, louder than the brake's echo still ringing in his ears. He swallowed hard, lungs stuttering as if the air itself had thickened. And then came the sound. Not from the radio, not from the engine, from the fog itself. A low, rolling hum, like tires on distant pavement, like engines droning in unison. The sound of a convoy. He twisted in his seat, eyes darting to the mirrors. Nothing. He looked forward. Still nothing. But the sound grew louder, surrounding him. Engines he couldn't see thrumming all around. Thomas clutched the wheel so tight his nails dug into the leather. His breath fogged the cab. The hum grew into a roar, passing unseen on both sides of him, rushing like a tide. For one fractured second he swore he saw shapes, dark, hulking silhouettes, sliding past in the mist just beyond his beams. And then, silence again. The road was his alone. He sat frozen, breath sawing in and out, the heater whirring, wipers scraping, his own pulse thundering in his ears. Finally, he forced the truck forward, gears grinding as he coaxed it back into motion. Each mile stretched like a year, each curve of the road an ache in his chest. The fog began to thin, stars breaking through above, trees re-emerging like phantoms retreating. But the road remained empty. No convoy, no tracks. Hours later, when the sky paled to the bruised light of morning, Thomas pulled into a station near Fairbanks. He stepped out, boots crunching in the snow, legs trembling beneath his weight. His eyes scanned the lot, desperate to find the other trucks, the pickup, the rigs. There was nothing. The attendant eyed him strangely as he stumbled inside, pouring coffee with hands that still shook. "You okay, driver? You look like you seen a ghost." Thomas tried to answer but found no words. Later, when he stepped back out into the cold morning light, he saw something in the fresh snow that stopped him dead. Across the lot, a line of tire tracks stretched toward the highway, deep, wide, unmistakably belonging to 3 heavy vehicles. But halfway across the asphalt, they simply stopped. Not faded, not buried. Stopped, like the road had swallowed them whole. Thomas stood there, steam rising from his cup, eyes locked on the impossible. And in the distance, beneath the low hum of the wind, he thought, just for a moment, he heard it again. Engines, a convoy moving through the fog. But when he turned, the road was empty. The windshield wipers scraped rhythmically across the glass, pushing away thick layers of sleet that clung stubbornly to the truck's front. Thomas Hale leaned forward in his seat, his broad shoulders hunched against the steering wheel, as though he could force the road ahead to reveal itself faster. He'd been driving since morning, hauling a load of medical supplies from Anchorage to a clinic 3 towns east of Fairbanks. What should have been a smooth 12-hour run had turned into a crawl, thanks to the early storm that had swept down from the mountains, blanketing the Alaskan highway in ice and fog. The heater rattled weakly, blowing air that never seemed warm enough, so Thomas nursed a battered thermos of black coffee balanced between his knees. He hummed under his breath, half in rhythm with the wheels crunching snow, half with the static-filled hum of the old FM radio perched in the dash. Music had been his one constant companion over the years, old blues cassettes, late-night AM chatter, local folk stations when he could find them. Tonight, the static was all he had. It sputtered in and out, a whispering backdrop that rose and fell like breath on glass. Every so often he tapped the dial, chasing something human through the storm. The headlights carved tunnels of pale light through the fog, revealing little more than skeletal trees burdened with snow. They rose in black silhouettes on either side, of the road bending inward like mourners at a wake. Thomas adjusted the collar of his jacket, tightened his grip on the wheel, and told himself what he always told himself on lonely nights. Just another road. Just another haul. Somewhere in the back of the cab, the cargo straps groaned. It was probably the ice shifting. Still, the sound made him glance into the mirror, staring at the shadowed interior before turning back to the road. He sipped his coffee, swallowed hard, and reached again for the radio knob. For the most part, it was just him, the road, and the storm. Hours dragged like years. The truck's tires hissed over slush, sometimes slipping, sometimes gripping, always humming that hypnotic lull of long-haul travel. The snow had let up for a moment, but fog hung thick and low, swallowing the forest. Thomas leaned closer to the glass, watching how the vapor clung to the trees, curling around branches as if the forest itself exhaled. He flicked his high beams on, regretted it immediately. The light bounced off the fog, flooding everything in a white blindness that pressed against the glass. He swore under his breath, killed the beams, and let the regular headlights guide him in their narrow cone. It was quiet now. Too quiet. Usually, even storms had voices. The wind whistling through cracks in the cab, snow slapping the windshield, the occasional groan of ice-laden trees bending. Tonight, silence pressed in on him, heavy and unnatural. Only the static on the radio filled. The cab, a thin crackling hiss. He tapped the dial again, and for a heartbeat he thought he heard something. Faint music buried under the noise. He leaned closer, twisting the knob with slow precision. The static rose, fell, then gave way to something older, rougher. The plaintive strum of a banjo. Thomas frowned. The sound was raw, like it had been pulled from a gramophone buried in dust. The voice that followed was thin, mournful, carrying a tune he didn't recognize. Words laced with something both strange and familiar. An old folk song, the kind of thing sung by men long gone, their bones lost to winters just like this one. He shivered but told himself it was nothing. An old station signal bouncing off the storm. Still his knuckles tightened on the wheel. The song played on for several miles. The voice rose and fell with aching sorrow, a tale of lost wanderers and endless snow. Each verse seemed to echo Thomas's own road. The endless night, the weight of the cold, the solitude pressing in from all sides. He found himself gripping the dial, torn between turning it off and letting it play. When the song ended, there was no DJ voice, no advertisement, no modern interruption. Instead, a brittle silence hummed, followed by the sharp click of a news bulletin. "This is a special announcement," a calm male voice declared. The tone was clipped, professional, yet hollow, like a recording warped by age. Reports confirmed the disappearance of 2 motorists traveling the Glen Highway. Last seen near mile marker 74. Drivers are advised. The voice broke into static. Thomas blinked, a nervous laugh bubbling in his throat. That couldn't be right. That section of highway had been closed since the late 60s, destroyed by a landslide. He knew because his father had told him stories about the men who drove it, about the ones who didn't come back. He shook his head and reached to turn the dial, but the broadcast cut back in. Additional disappearances have been reported near the talk cutoff. The voice continued, calm as ever. Motorists traveling alone are at particular risk. Use caution. If you are listening. The words warped, stretched, then returned with chilling clarity. You may already be among them. Thomas's hand froze on the dial. He snapped it off. Silence slammed into the cab, thick as the fog pressing against the glass. His heart thudded in his chest loud enough to fill the space where music should have been. It was a trick, he told himself. Some local station replaying old recordings for Halloween, maybe. Except it wasn't Halloween. It was February, and no station had reception out here. The forest pressed closer. The fog shifted like it was alive, curling tendrils across the road. Thomas leaned forward, staring hard at the painted lines as though they could anchor him. Then faintly, the radio clicked back on. The volume rose without his hand on the knob. Static bled into another folk song, this one darker, minor chords strummed hard, the voice scratchier, almost desperate. Thomas's breath misted the glass as he whispered, "No, no, no, no." He reached for the dial again, twisting, slamming it off. It stayed quiet for 5 seconds. Then the news voice returned, louder this time. Highway Patrol advises travelers to remain vigilant. Reports confirm sightings of a dark truck matching the description of your vehicle. The driver is not to be trusted. Thomas's blood ran cold. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, his shout filling the cab. "Shut up!" The broadcast ignored him. "If you are listening, you are next." The lights flickered. Something moved in the fog. Thomas's eyes snapped forward, heart hammering. There, a shape on the shoulder, barely visible in the headlights. A person, standing still, their outline blurred by mist. He slammed the brakes, the truck skidding, on ice, tires shrieking. The thermos spilled, black coffee streaking across the floor. The figure didn't move, just stood, watching. The headlights cut across them, and for a split second Thomas swore he saw details. A man in old clothes, coat, frayed, face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His skin looked gray, stretched thin, lips unmoving though a faint hum, like a radio voice, echoed through the cab. Then the fog swallowed him. The truck sat idling, exhaust curling into the night. Thomas's breath came fast, white and panicked. He gripped the wheel, forced his foot back on the gas and drove. The radio clicked on again. This time it was laughter. Low broken laughter, as though someone far away had leaned too close to the microphone. Every mile was worse. The fog thickened until it felt like he drove underwater. Shadows flitted between trees, always vanishing when he tried to focus. The radio cycled between songs and bulletins, each one older, stranger. A woman found frozen, still gripping the steering wheel. No remains were ever recovered. Highway swallowed them whole. Each report felt like a nail in his chest. He slapped the radio, unplugged the wires, even ripped the fuse out. None of it mattered. The voice kept coming, seeping, from the speakers like blood through cloth. At mile marker 90, the headlights revealed another figure, this one closer, standing directly in the road. Thomas swerved hard, the truck fishtailing across ice. Cargo straps screamed in the back as boxes shifted. He fought the wheel, heart pounding. The figure didn't move. He glanced in the mirror. Nothing was there. And yet when he looked back, someone sat in the passenger seat. A man, hat shadowing his eyes, lips curved in a stiff, unnatural smile. His skin sagged pale and lifeless, but his eyes gleamed with static white noise, hissing faintly as he turned to stare. "You're next," the voice whispered. Not from the radio this time. From the thing beside him. Thomas swerved again, screaming, slamming the brakes until the truck skidded sideways, nearly toppling. When the vehicle groaned to a stop, the seat was empty. The forest pressed in, silent. The rest of the night blurred into madness. Sometimes he drove with both hands white-knuckled on the wheel, muttering prayers he hadn't said since childhood. Sometimes he thought he saw faces in the trees, hollow-eyed men and women, their mouths moving in silent hymns that matched the radio songs. Sometimes he thought he heard his father's voice, warning him not to take this road, not tonight. Every attempt to silence the broadcast failed. The radio bled with voices even when he ripped the panel clean from the dashboard. The wires sparked, smoked, yet the sound continued, thin and steady, woven into the storm. Near dawn, the songs shifted. They grew softer, almost kind, lullabies, sung for the lost. Thomas found tears streaking his face, though he didn't remember crying. His chest hurt, his hands shook, and then silence. The radio died. The fog lifted. The first gray light of morning spread across the horizon, touching the snow with faint gold. Thomas drove until he saw a gas station, its lights faint against the pale sky. He pulled in, stumbled from the cab, and leaned against the cold metal pump. His breath came ragged, his hands trembling so badly he dropped the nozzle twice. Inside, the clerk looked up with tired eyes. "Rough night?" Thomas nodded, unable to speak. The clerk frowned, tilting his head. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." Thomas forced a laugh, hollow and dry. "Radio trouble," he muttered. The clerk chuckled. "Radio trouble? Out here? There hasn't been a station on that frequency in, 30 years. He shook his head, turned back to his newspaper. Thomas stared at him, blood draining from his face. The headline stared back, crisp black letters above a grainy photo. Motorist vanishes on Glen Highway. Last seen alone. His coffee-stained hands shook harder. The radio in his truck hissed faintly, though he'd left it behind. Somewhere in the static, a voice whispered again, "You're next." And the clerk didn't seem to hear it at all. The wipers beat back the snow in a slow, steady rhythm, squeaking against the windshield as David leaned forward over the wheel. His wife, Claire, sat beside him with a paper coffee cup clutched between her hands, steam fogging her glasses. In the back seat, their daughter Emily had fallen asleep. Her head tilted against the window, mouth slightly open, the glow of the overhead light from the truck's dash washing over her pale skin. The heater struggled against the bite of the Alaskan winter, and every now and then David would slap the vent with his gloved palm, urging the warmth to flow stronger. The highway stretched into endless white, illuminated only by the truck's twin beams. Snowflakes streaked through the light like falling needles, the storm swallowing the world beyond their little bubble of steel and glass. A sign had flashed past 10 miles ago. Last service is 40 miles. That had been hours earlier, or at least it felt like hours. Out here, time stretched and collapsed in strange ways, the monotony of snow and forest bending minutes into something heavier. David hummed softly to the low crackle of the radio, an old country station barely hanging on. The announcer's voice had long since dissolved into static, leaving behind only scraps of melody and long silences. Claire, in her tiredness, smiled faintly at the sound, curling deeper into her coat. They had been on the road since dawn, headed north to visit his brother in Fairbanks, and the blizzard had struck sooner than forecasted. The gas gauge dipped closer to empty, and David's jaw tightened. He kept telling himself they'd find something, a station, a diner with lights glowing warm against the storm, some sign of human presence in this lonely wilderness. His daughter stirred in the back, muttering in her sleep, and he glanced into the mirror to make sure she was still covered with the blanket. Then his eyes caught the void beyond the glass. Trees lined the road in jagged black columns, their tops lost in white haze, their shadows bending and stretching in the headlights, as though they leaned closer with every mile. He blinked hard and returned his gaze to the road, whispering under his breath, "Just a little farther." The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the truck's frame, carrying with it an eerie whistle that slipped through every seam. The longer they drove, the quieter Claire became, her silence almost more unsettling than the storm. Finally, she pointed ahead, her voice a hopeful murmur. "Look, there." Through the swirling snow, faint shapes emerged, the outline of a structure just beyond the trees perched on the edge of the road. A small cabin, its roof heavy with snow, the faint suggestion of a porch sagging under the weight. David slowed the truck, tires crunching against ice, headlights sweeping across the wooden frame. There were no lights inside, no trail of smoke from a chimney, no tire tracks leading up to the door. Yet it stood there, waiting, as though it had been preserved for their arrival. "Thank God," Claire breathed. "At least we can wait out the storm." They pulled off the road into a shallow curve of snow and stopped. The storm seemed louder now, hammering against the windows, demanding they make a choice. Emily stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. "Where are we?" "Somewhere safe," David said, though the word caught strangely in his throat. The three of them bundled against the cold and trudged through knee-high drifts to the cabin. Snow swallowed their boots, crunching in sharp bursts that seemed to echo into the forest. David gripped the iron handle and pushed. The door creaked open easily, as though it hadn't been locked in decades. Warmth did not greet them. Instead, a stagnant chill clung to the air, colder than even the storm outside, as though the cabin itself had been hollowed of life. Their breath hung visible before their faces as they stepped inside. The first thing they noticed was the table. A wooden dining table stood in the center of the single room, 4 places neatly set. Plates, forks, cups, and a pitcher half-filled, with what had once been water, now frozen solid. A loaf of bread sat petrified on a cutting board, dusted with ice. Chairs waited, tucked in neatly, as though a family had been moments from dinner before simply vanishing. Emily clung to her mother's coat. "Daddy? Who lived here?" David stared at the plates, at the way the forks gleamed faintly in the beam of his flashlight. He swallowed. "Doesn't matter, it's shelter. Let's get warm." The cabin had no electricity, but they found a small fireplace stacked with logs. David knelt, striking matches until flame finally caught, casting the room in a flickering, amber glow. Shadows jumped across the walls, bending over the set table, making the plates glisten as though wet. Claire set their blanket on the floor near the fire, coaxing Emily down to sit. And for the first time in hours, the girl smiled faintly at the warmth. The storm raged beyond the cabin walls, but inside, there was silence. Too much silence. Every sound they made, from the crack of the logs to the faint sighs of breath, seemed magnified in the emptiness. David tried not to look at the table, but his eyes kept returning, drawn by the unnatural stillness of it. Claire broke the silence softly. "Maybe the owners left in a hurry. Or maybe it's been empty for years." "Years?" David muttered, "with food still on the table?" Neither of them answered. The fire burned steady, lulling Emily into sleep once again. Claire leaned against the wall, exhaustion pulling her eyes closed. David sat awake, watching the flames lick upward. His mind drifted between drowsiness and unease, his ears straining against the cabin's quiet. That was when he heard it. A single sound, so faint he thought at first it belonged to the storm. A creak above them, like weight pressing against wooden boards. His head snapped upward. The roof slanted low, beams heavy with snow, but there was no second floor. The sound came again, deliberate slow footsteps pacing overhead. David's chest tightened. He glanced at his wife, still half asleep, and then at his daughter, curled beneath the blanket. He held his breath, listening. The steps moved from one side to the other, steady, measured, like someone walking across a floor that should not exist. The fire popped sharply, breaking the silence. The steps ceased. David rose quietly, moving to the door. He opened it just enough to let the storms howl inside, snow lashing across the threshold. Nothing on the roof, only endless white swirling down. He shut the door and leaned his back, against it, his pulse hammering. He told himself it was the storm shifting ice on the beams. He told himself it was his tired mind. He lay down beside Claire, letting exhaustion pull him close to sleep. But as he drifted, the sound came again, steps pacing above, circling, relentless. By morning, the storm had not passed. Pale gray light seeped through the frosted windows. David stirred awake to find the fire cold, reduced to ash. Claire was awake too, her eyes wide, lips pale. "You heard it too," she whispered. He nodded slowly. Emily stirred, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart," Claire said quickly, stroking her hair. But her hand trembled. They ate what little food they had, silence pressing between them. When David stepped outside to check the truck, he froze. Snow had drifted high against the wheels, but what chilled him was not the storm. There were footprints leading from the cabin porch into the woods. Bare feet, deep and unmistakable, disappearing into the trees. He returned inside, refusing to tell Claire or Emily what he'd seen. Better not to plant fear. Better to believe his own eyes had been mistaken. Yet that night, when the fire burned low, the steps came again. This time louder, sharper. Something scraped along the beams above, dragging like fingernails against wood. The plates on the table trembled faintly, cups rattling. Emily whimpered in her sleep, twisting under the blanket. Claire's hand found David's, gripping hard. "We need to leave," she hissed. "In the storm. Better the storm than this." But the storm had only grown worse. The windows howled with icy wind, snow plastering against the glass, the truck invisible beyond the curtain of white. They were trapped. The steps above grew frenzied, pacing faster, circling until they stopped abruptly. Silence crashed down, and then, knock. 3 slow knocks against the cabin door. The fire guttered, casting the plates into shadow, their shapes warped into gaping mouths in the flicker. Emily sat upright, eyes wide, whispering, "Daddy, someone's outside." David rose, heart pounding, and edged toward the door. He placed his ear against it. Nothing but the scream of the wind. He unlatched the handle and pulled it open a crack. Empty, only snow swirling, the porch buried, and then he saw them, on the table. The plates were no longer empty. Steam curled upward from fresh food, meat glistening, bread warm, water unfrozen. The chairs pulled back as though waiting for them. David staggered back, slamming the door. Claire clutched Emily tight, tears streaking her face. "We have to go," she said again, voice cracking. The footsteps resumed, this time descending. Down the beams, into the walls, into the floor itself. Heavy, human, impossibly close. The fire died with a hiss, plunging the cabin into darkness. What happened in the final hours, none of them could describe the same way. Shadows pressed from every corner. The sound of breathing that wasn't theirs filled the room, and something cold brushed across Emily's cheek. She screamed, and David tore open the door, dragging them into the storm. Snow swallowed them instantly, blinding, searing against their skin. Behind them, the cabin's windows glowed faintly with firelight, though they had left the hearth cold. Figures moved inside, seated at the table, eating silently, heads turning toward the door. They stumbled through the drifts, finding the truck by blind luck, scraping ice from the windshield with frozen fingers. The engine coughed, stuttered, then roared to life. Tires spun, caught, and they lurched onto the road. In the mirror, the cabin shrank into the white, its door swinging wide, shadows spilling onto the porch as though watching them flee. For hours, they drove in silence, snow clawing against the windows. Only when the storm began to ease did Claire speak, her voice raw. "David, that cabin, you saw it, didn't you?" He gripped the wheel, knuckles white. "We're not talking about it. But we never saw it. Do you understand?" Emily whimpered in the back, half asleep. "The people at the table," she murmured. "They were waiting for us." No one answered. When they finally reached Fairbanks, the snow was just beginning to clear. They found gas, warmth, safety. Yet when David asked locals about the stretch of road, about the cabin that stood by the forest, every person shook their head. "There hasn't been a cabin out there for 40 years, one man told him. "Burned down with the family still, inside. No one goes near those woods anymore." David forced a smile and thanked him, but his stomach turned hollow. That night, when he lay in bed, safe under a roof with his family breathing beside him, he closed his eyes and heard it again. A single step creaking somewhere above. Snow came down in thick, heavy curtains, swallowing the two-lane Alaskan highway in a ghostly blur of white. The wipers fought a losing battle against the frost and slush, their steady rhythm mixing with the low hum of the diesel engine. Inside, the cab, Earl Kincaid leaned forward, knuckles white on the steering wheel, a paper cup of truck-stop coffee steaming in the holder beside him. His eyes flicked between the road and the time glowing on the dashboard, 2:17 a.m. Another night. Run, another lonely haul. He was hauling timber out of Anchorage, bound for Fairbanks by dawn. He'd driven this route 100 times before. Knew every mile marker and curve, but in the winter storms it always felt like new territory, as if the land itself rearranged in the darkness. His heater coughed uneven warmth, and the cabin smelled, faintly of old coffee, motor oil, and his faded pine-scented air freshener dangling from the mirror. The radio spat static, then settled into a country song muffled beneath the storm's howl. Earl rubbed his tired eyes. 53 years old, 2 decades on the road, and the work hadn't gotten easier. His wife was asleep back home in Wasilla, probably curled up in bed with the dog at her feet. He told her he'd be careful, told her not to worry, but these roads had a way of testing promises. Every mile deeper into the wilderness meant another step away from the world of phones and lights and people. Beyond the glow of his headlights, the world was absolute black and white, snow, rock, and forest lost under an endless sky. The tires crunched over hard-packed snow, and he sipped his coffee, its bitter warmth anchoring him in the monotony of the drive. The cab rattled with each gust of wind pressing against the trailer. Earl found himself humming along to the radio, just a man alone with his rig, braving another winter night in Alaska. He had no reason to think this run would be any different. No reason to believe that something was watching from the ridge above, waiting for him to notice. The snow eased for a moment, thinning enough to reveal the sweeping lines of the mountain ridge running parallel to the road. The moon slipped briefly from behind the clouds, painting the world in pale silver. Earl glanced up instinctively, scanning the ridge as his high beams cut through the dark. That was when he saw her. At first, he thought it was just a drift of snow catching the light strangely, a trick of the storm. But then he blinked and the shape resolved. A woman. She stood on the ridge high above the road, dressed in white so thin it seemed made of frost. Her arm was raised, slow and deliberate, as though she were waving. Earl's throat went dry. He leaned forward, squinting. The truck roared past another bend, but his eyes never left her figure. A woman? Out here, at this hour? He felt a chill crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He shook his head, muttering under his breath. Just the snow. Just the damn snow. He tapped the steering wheel, trying to focus on the yellow lines flashing beneath him. The ridge blurred again with falling snow, and when he looked back, the figure was gone. But the image stuck with him. He tried to shove it aside, but it lingered like a ghost behind his eyes. The long white form, the raised hand, the silence of the mountains. The road stretched on, quiet except for the groan of the tires and the whistle of wind through the cab. His coffee tasted bitter now, almost metallic, and the song on the radio fizzled back into static. The storm thickened again, snowflakes like shards of glass in the beams of his headlights. The world narrowed to just a tunnel of white, endless and consuming. Earl shifted in his seat, checking his mirrors. The trailer swayed in the crosswind, but the road behind was empty. Not a set of headlights for miles. Then, as the road dipped low between ridges, he saw her again, this time closer. On the next rise, standing just 20 feet from the shoulder, her figure stark against the snow. The same pale dress, the same slow, deliberate wave. Earl's heart kicked hard in his chest. He slowed instinctively, foot hovering over the brake. His headlights spilled across her, but something was wrong. Her face was indistinct, blurred like smoke, features smudged into the storm. Her hair lifted in the wind, but too slowly, as if underwater. He hit the brakes. The truck growled and hissed, tires skidding briefly on the icy road before catching hold. The trailer swayed and Earl cursed, gripping the wheel tight. The truck slowed to a crawl, headlights washing over the ridge. The woman did not move. She only waved. Earl killed the radio and the silence pressed in, broken only by the engine's idle and the rattle of wind against the cab. He sat there for a moment, staring up at her, pulse thudding in his ears. Against his better judgment, he reached for his flashlight. "God damn it, Earl," he muttered. "Don't be stupid." But he was already unbuckling, already opening the door. The night hit him like a wall, bitter cold slashing at his face, snow swirling around his boots. His breath plumed white into the dark as he stepped onto the road. The truck's headlights lit the ridge, and there she was, still as stone, still waving. Earl raised the flashlight, its beam cutting across the snow. He focused it on her face. What he saw made his stomach twist. Her body wasn't flesh at all. It was snow. Packed white snow, sculpted crudely into the shape of a woman. Her arm, raised as if to wave, was nothing but a stiff, icy protrusion. Her hair was a drift of frost. Her dress nothing but the smooth curve of wind-carved ice. And then, as he stared, the figure collapsed. It didn't fall naturally. It caved in on itself, like something hollow, crumbling under an unseen hand. The snow blew away in a sudden gust of wind, scattering into the night until nothing remained but bare ridge. Earl stumbled back, the beam of his flashlight trembling across the dark trees. The storm howled louder, like laughter buried in the wind. He spun on his heel and climbed back into the cab, slamming the door, chest heaving. His hands shook so badly he spilled coffee on the dashboard. For a long moment, he sat frozen, eyes locked on the ridge. It was empty now, just snow and rock. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had moved closer. The rest of the drive blurred into a fever of dread. The storm swallowed the world, and every rise of land looked like another ridge hiding another figure. He swore he caught glimpses of movement in the periphery, white forms standing just beyond the beam of his headlights, vanishing when he blinked. The radio hissed with static no matter what station he tried. Once he thought he heard a voice inside it whispering his name. By the time the storm broke, he was drenched in cold sweat, fingers aching from gripping the wheel. The horizon paled with the first trace of dawn, and the long road ahead finally showed signs of the town's edge. Civilization, lights, people, safety. He rolled into Fairbanks pale and trembling, parked his rig at the depot, and sat there for nearly an hour, staring at the frost creeping along his windshield. He told himself he'd imagined it all, that it was the storm, the exhaustion, the isolation, that the woman on the ridge had never been there. But sometimes, late at night, when the roads are empty and the snow comes down heavy, Earl swears he sees her again, always on the ridge, always waving, and each time, she's a little closer. Snow came down in steady sheets, veiling the world in a silvery hush that seemed almost holy if not for the loneliness of it. Daniel Mercer gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup truck, eyes fixed on the pale strip of road illuminated by his headlights. He was used to these drives. The mountain pass had been his hunting ground since he was a boy. His father had taken him here, teaching him to track moose in the drifts, how to read the forest's silences like a second language. Now, at 43, he still came back, not just for the meat, but for the solitude. The cab smelled of wet, wool, and the faint tang of gun oil. His rifle, unloaded, lay across the bench seat, wrapped in a blanket. A thermos of coffee steamed faintly in the cup holder, and the radio crackled with static before fading back to silence. Out here, stations were unreliable. The mountains swallowed signals whole. He preferred it that way. No chatter, no noise. Just him and the snow. His headlights cut through a swirl of flakes, bouncing against the black silhouettes of spruce trees, leaning in from either side of the narrow pass. Now and then the road curved and the tires slid slightly on the icy surface, but Daniel knew how to correct without panic. This was muscle memory, the kind of knowledge you earned after decades, on roads no sane tourist would dare after sundown. He thought briefly of home, of his wife asleep with the dog curled at her feet, of his teenage son who now wanted little to do with hunting trips, who rolled his eyes at the smell of venison cooking. A faint smile touched his lips. Times were changing, but he remained the same. Out here in the cold heart of Alaska, he felt steady. The hum of the engine, the rhythm of the wipers, the hiss of the snow on the windshield. It all became a kind of music. A lull. The night stretched wide and endless before him. The forest pressed closer as the road narrowed, branches heavy with snow leaning low. His headlights flickered across patterns of ice, shadows reaching, retreating. Nothing unusual. The kind of ordinary strangeness the wilderness always offered. A place alive yet empty. Daniel leaned back, one hand on the wheel, and took a sip of coffee. It burned his tongue slightly, grounding him in the warmth. Outside, the world was locked, in deep freeze. The road wound like a pale scar through black mountains, and the truck seemed the only moving thing for miles. But then, in the corner of his eye, something shifted. A glimmer between the trees. At first, he thought it was a reflection. Headlights, from another car behind him, maybe catching on the icy branches, except there had been no other vehicle on this road for hours. He slowed slightly, leaning forward. The lights weren't behind him. They were in the forest itself. Two faint orbs, hovering. White-blue, like fireflies too bright to be real. They drifted side by side, weaving gently between the trees as though carried by invisible hands. Daniel squinted, the lines of his brow deepening. Maybe snowmobiles, he thought. Or search teams with lanterns, though who the hell would be searching this far up the pass at midnight? He pulled the truck onto the shoulder, crunching over ice until it rested near a drift. He left the engine idling, breath fogging the glass as he pressed his face to the window. The lights were moving closer, slipping effortlessly between the trunks. They seemed too high for people, hanging above head height, swaying without sound. His gut tightened. Curiosity pushed him. He shut off the engine, the sudden silence, booming in his ears. The night pressed close, and in that silence he could hear the snow settling, the faint groan of trees under its weight. He rolled down the window. Cold air bit his skin instantly, sharp and dry. The lights floated nearer. 3 now, not 2. Perfect circles, pale as moons, drifting with impossible precision. He frowned, muttering to himself. Flare drones, maybe? Some new search and rescue tech? But there was no hum, no buzz of machinery. Just silence. Pure, aching silence. Daniel reached for the rifle out of instinct, though he didn't load it. It was less about defense and more about reassurance, a relic of habit. He stepped out, boots crunching into snow up to his ankles. The cold wrapped him instantly, and the forest loomed like a cathedral of black pillars. The lights slowed as if noticing him. They hung between the trees, bobbing faintly. 5 now. No beams, no sources visible. Just orbs, glowing without casting, proper shadows. A chill crawled up his spine. Something about their movement was wrong. Too smooth, too synchronized. They drifted in unison, then spread apart, beginning to form a wide arc. Surrounding. Daniel's breath puffed out in quick bursts. He glanced back at the truck. Safe, familiar, warm. The urge to climb back in and drive away pulsed strong, but his legs wouldn't obey. He was pinned by the strangeness, the awe, the creeping dread that this was not man-made. The lights edged closer. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. He swallowed, throat dry. For a moment he thought he saw something in the glow. Hints of structure, outlines like faces pressing against thin membranes of light. He blinked hard, and the impression was gone. Snow whispered down, landing soft on his coat. His boots sank slightly deeper as he shifted his weight. The forest no longer felt like the same place he knew. The silence was suffocating, oppressive, the kind of silence that waits. He backed toward the truck, rifle clutched against his chest. The lights mirrored him, hovering forward with slow inevitability. They spread wider now, circling, 8 of them. 10. Each one steady, unwavering. His pulse quickened. He muttered, voice shaking. Not real, not real. Just the cold playing tricks, but even as he said it, he felt the lie. He reached the driver's side door, fumbling with the handle. His fingers felt clumsy, stiff with cold and panic. He climbed in, slammed the door, locked it. The truck was a fragile shell of glass and steel, but it felt like a barrier nonetheless. He twisted the key. The engine coughed, then roared to life. Relief surged through him. But then the headlights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. The lights outside hovered closer, their glow, bleeding into the cab, painting his hands pale. He gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened. Through the windshield he saw them complete the circle. Perfect, in closing. The radio hissed suddenly, alive with static, though he hadn't touched it. A whisper threaded through the noise. Not words, not in any language he knew, but layered tones, deep and low, vibrating in his chest. His vision blurred for a moment, black creeping at the edges. He shook his head, forcing focus. The lights pulsed in unison. Once, twice. The forest seemed to lean in with them. Daniel slammed the gear shift into drive. The tires spun, then caught, lurching the truck forward. He drove straight through the circle, heart hammering. The lights didn't move. They just hovered, letting him pass. For a heartbeat, he thought he was free. But in the rearview mirror, he saw them shift. Slowly, deliberately, they began to follow. He pressed harder on the accelerator. The truck rattled over the icy road, engine straining. The headlights cut through the dark, but behind him, the orbs kept pace, gliding silently. Above the snow, his breath came ragged. Sweat chilled his skin despite the freezing cab. He risked another glance. The lights were closer now, impossibly fast, gaining without effort. He gritted his teeth, muttering curses under his breath. The radio crackled again. This time, the whisper became clearer, shaping into syllables that bent and broke like voices underwater. He caught fragments, sounds that seemed to claw at memory. His name, perhaps, stretched and warped. The wheel jerked in his hands. He fought to keep control as the truck fishtailed. The lights surged to either side, flanking him. For a moment, he felt as though he were flying through some vast tunnel of pale fire, the forest erased by glow. Panic became raw instinct. He slammed the brakes, the truck skidding sideways across the ice. It screeched, spun, and came to a stop at the edge of the road, snow spraying high. The lights froze with him, encircling once more. His chest heaved, hands shook violently. He raised the rifle now, half crazed enough to fire, though it was still unloaded. He aimed through the windshield at the nearest orb. His finger pulled the trigger with a hollow click. The light pulsed once, as if mocking him. Then all of them surged closer. The cab filled with searing white, drowning detail, erasing edges. He screamed, covering his eyes. The sound of his own voice barely reached his ears, swallowed by a humming vibration that seemed to come from inside his skull. And then, darkness. Silence. When he opened his eyes, the lights were gone. The truck sat idling, headlights steady. The forest was empty, the road ahead pale and endless once more. Daniel gasped, gulping air as though he'd been underwater. His hands trembled violently on the wheel. He scanned the mirrors, the trees, the snow. Nothing, just the night. He forced the truck into gear and drove. He didn't stop until the pass was behind him, until the distant glow of town lights broke. The horizon. Even then he couldn't shake it. The memory of the lights hovering, circling, the soundless precision, the whispers that still echoed faintly in his skull, too quiet to be words, too persistent to be forgotten. He told no one, not his wife, not his friends. But sometimes, driving the pass again in daylight, he felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing from the tree line. And once, late at night, weeks later, he caught a reflection in his rearview mirror. Just for a second, just enough to freeze his blood, a pale orb hovering silently in the back seat. The snow fell in thick curtains, swallowing the world in white. Behind the wheel of his 18-wheeler, Dale Knox squinted past the sweep of wipers as they slapped rhythmically against the windshield. His thermos of black coffee steamed in, the cup holder untouched, while a battered cassette player hummed an old country song, half lost in static. The heater rattled, coughing warmth against the cab's glass. Outside, beyond the dim cones of headlights, there was only darkness and endless storm. It was the kind of Alaskan night that turned time into a blur, measured not in miles but in the sound of chains chewing at ice beneath rubber. They were 3 rigs strong, running together through the blizzard. Dale led the rear, following the faint red glow of the taillights in front of him. Roy, the eldest of the 3, took point in a blue Peterbilt that looked as weathered as its driver. Sandwiched between them was Carl, a quiet kid just breaking into long haul, eager to learn, his voice always hesitant on the CB. The storm had worsened quicker than anyone expected, swallowing up the road in white. A single stretch of highway, carved between pine forest and mountainside. No exits for 50 miles, no gas stations, no towns. Just the road, the snow, and the convoy. Dale chewed a toothpick, rolling it between his teeth, listening to the faint hum of Roy's gravel voice, crackling over the radio. They joked about bad coffee from the last diner, about Carl's nervous driving, about how the company dispatcher never knew when to call a runoff. For a while, despite the storm, it felt like any other haul. The camaraderie of the road was enough to push back the weight of isolation. The snow pressed harder against the windshield, fat flakes shimmering like falling ash. Dale adjusted his mirrors, saw nothing but swirling white and the faint gleam of Carl's taillights ahead. He hummed along with the radio, tapped his fingers on the wheel, and for a moment the world seemed calm, sealed in the cab's cocoon of engine rumble and heater breath. But the storm wasn't silent. Between gusts of wind, there came a sound that prickled at the edges of his hearing. Something beneath the howl, low, droning, almost like another engine buried deep in the storm. He turned the CB down, listening harder. The noise faded as quickly as it had come, vanishing into snow. Dale snorted, shook his head, and told himself it was nothing but the echo of his own rig bouncing off the mountainside. The convoy pressed forward. Time stretched. Dale's eyes tracked the red glow of Carl's taillights, steady through the curtain of white. But then, with a blink, the lights were gone. He blinked again, leaned forward. Nothing but storm. He keyed the CB. "Carl, you still there?" A beat of static. Then Carl's voice, shaky but audible. "Still here, Dale, just snow's thick. I think Roy's pulling ahead." Dale eased his truck forward, scanning the blankness for any sign of light. After a few moments, two faint red dots re-emerged, swallowed by snow, but there, Carl's rig. Dale exhaled, settled back. He told himself the storm was playing tricks with visibility. Still, he couldn't shake the brief panic of emptiness, the sense of following ghosts in a white void. Another half-hour passed. Roy's voice filled the CB, a steady reassurance. Carl chimed in less often, but his taillights stayed constant. Dale stared at those twin glows until they felt like lifelines in the dark. Then once more, they vanished. This time, no return. "Carl, you copy?" Silence. Static swelled, hissed. "Carl, talk to me." Nothing. Dale's palms sweated against the wheel. His headlights pierced only a few yards ahead. Beyond that was an infinite white shroud. He pushed the CB again. "Roy, you see Carl up there?" Roy's voice came, calm but strained. "Negative. He was right behind me, 1 second there, next second gone. Damn storm swallowed him whole." Dale's throat tightened. "We pulling over?" "Can't. No shoulder. Snowdrifts'll bury us. Keep moving." They did. The road stretched on, endless and empty, the two-truck convoy pressing into the storm. But Dale kept glancing at his mirrors, at the void where Carl should have been. The highway behind him felt too silent, too hollow. The CB hissed, cracked. Then Carl's voice cut through, faint and warped. "Still here." Dale's chest loosened. He snatched the mic. "Carl, Jesus, kid, where the hell'd you go?" But the voice didn't answer. It only repeated, softer. "Still here." Static swallowed it whole. Roy cursed through the radio, muttering about bad connections, but Dale couldn't shake the way Carl's voice had sounded. Too slow. Too empty. As if it hadn't been carried by radio waves at all, but by something colder, older, riding the wind. Hours bled together. Dale's coffee went cold, forgotten. The storm showed no sign of letting up. Roy's taillights blurred ahead, dim beacons in the white void. Dale clung to them, whispering to himself. He imagined Carl safe in his rig, maybe just lost in the whiteout, maybe his radio failing. But the silence behind him grew heavier, pressing against the cab like a weight. Then Roy's lights flickered. Dale's stomach lurched. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, leaned forward, but the taillights pulsed once, twice, then vanished into the snow. "Roy?" Dale's voice cracked as he slammed the CB. "Roy, you copy?" Static answered. He pushed harder. "Roy, say something." Nothing. Just the hiss of white noise. Dale's rig thundered forward into emptiness. No taillights ahead. No convoy. Just him, the storm, and a road that suddenly felt infinite. His breathing quickened. He forced himself to slow down, to keep steady. He told himself they'd all pull out of the whiteout soon, regroup at the next stop. Maybe Roy had gotten too far ahead, maybe Carl had taken a wrong turn. They'd all laugh about it later. That was what he told himself. But then the CB crackled, voices bleeding through. Familiar voices. Roy's low drawl. "Road's clearing soon." Carl's nervous tone. "Still here? Still here." Dale gripped the mic. "Roy? Carl? Where the hell are you?" The voices didn't answer him. They carried on, faint chatter, looping in fragments as though they were speaking to each other in a world he couldn't reach. Roy joked about diner coffee again. Carl muttered about the snow, the same lines they'd spoken earlier that night, now repeating, like ghosts stuck in memory. The hair on Dale's neck prickled. His rig roared against the storm, headlights carving tunnels into endless white. The voices played on, steady as a recording but warped by static, stretched, wrong. Then silence. The storm pressed heavier, thick flakes blinding the windshield. Dale's knuckles ached on the wheel. His breath came in clouds, frosting the cabs, glass despite the heater, and then in the reflection of his side mirror, he saw them. Two faint red glows impossibly close behind. Taillights burning steady in the storm. His heart leapt. He grabbed the CB. "Carl, you behind me?" No answer. The lights stayed, unwavering. He checked again. Yes, taillights, hovering in the snow, too close, too steady. No truck shape attached. Just orbs of red burning in the white. Dale slammed the pedal, rig groaning forward. The lights matched him, never closer, never further. Just following, the CB screeched, loud, shrill, until a chorus of voices bled through. Carl, Roy, and others Dale didn't recognize. Dozens, overlapping, whispering, muttering. 100 drivers lost on the road, speaking all at once, tangled in static. His head rang. He shouted into the mic, begged them to stop, but the voices only grew louder, a tide of noise filling the cab. He heard laughter, weeping, words looping endlessly. Still here, still here, still here. The headlights cut into a curve of shoo and Dale jerked the wheel, tires shrieking on ice. The rig fishtailed, corrected. The red lights behind didn't sway. They simply glided, unblinking, steady as stars. Panic consumed him. His mind screamed to stop, to pull over, to abandon the cab and flee into the snow. But something deeper told him no. The storm would swallow him whole. So he drove. He drove until his body was numb, until his eyes burned, until time ceased to matter. The voices ebbed and flowed, rising in static waves, then cutting to silence. The red lights lingered, eternal companions. When dawn finally clawed through the storm, pale gray over endless forest, the road ahead lay empty. No Roy. No Carl. No convoy. Just Dale's rig alone, tires chewing frostbitten asphalt. The red lights were gone, the radio silent. He pulled into the next way station hours later, face pale, hands trembling. Other truckers gathered, confused at the sight of him. They asked where his convoy had gone. Dale tried to answer, but words failed. Later, they found Roy's rig empty, parked neatly by the roadside, engine off, doors locked from inside. Miles away, Carl's truck sat half buried in a snowdrift, also empty, also locked. Both men vanished without a trace. Dale swore he never saw them again. But sometimes, when the storms roll heavy across the northern roads, his CB crackles with faint chatter, Roy's laugh, Carl's nervous mutter, and always the same whisper rising from the static, still here. The snow had been falling for hours, swallowing the Alaskan highway until the lines on the asphalt vanished into a continuous sheet of white. Adrian Matthews gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles pale against the leather. The faint hum of the heater competing with the low static of the radio. He was a solo traveler, hauling nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and a thermos of coffee. Somewhere in the distance, far beyond the windshield's tired wipers, was Anchorage. That was where he'd find his next job, or maybe just another reason to keep moving. The cab of his old Ford was warm, the air fogged faintly with the rhythm of his breath. On the passenger seat sat a crumpled map, the edges torn, and beside it a Polaroid photo of his sister's kids smiling with missing teeth. He drove through the blur of snow with that photo always in sight, a reminder that he wasn't completely untethered. Steam rose in delicate curls from the coffee lid wedged between the console and gear shift, the rich smell filling the truck. For a while, it was enough to ground him against the storm pressing in from all sides. The road wound like a dark thread through the endless whiteness, flanked by skeletal trees that bowed under the snow. Occasionally, the high beams caught the reflective glint of a roadside marker, or the ghostly silhouette of a sign smothered in frost. He turned the radio dial until static gave way to faint country music, the singer's voice warbling as if drowning, underwater. He chuckled, shaking his head, and tapped the steering wheel in rhythm. Alone in the snowstorm, he told himself he wasn't lonely. Just traveling, just passing through. It was nearly midnight, the hour where shadows lengthened and silence pressed tighter. The wipers dragged across the glass, squeaking in protest. Outside, the blizzard thickened, each flake pelting like ash. The headlights created a tunnel of vision, making the road feel narrower, the forest thicker. Adrian's eyelids felt heavy from the hypnotic sweep of the snow, but the bitter sip of coffee revived him. He flexed his fingers against the wheel. All he needed was to push another 60 miles, maybe less, before pulling over. But the storm was getting worse. He couldn't see more than a few yards ahead. When the tires slipped slightly on the icy road, he cursed and guided the truck onto the shoulder. The engine idled in protest. Out there was blindness. Pure white, swallowing every contour. The truck shuddered as the wind howled across the empty highway. Adrian sighed, grabbed the thermos and leaned back in the seat. Just a break, he told himself. A pause until the weather passed. The silence inside the truck was heavy, broken only by the rattle of wind buffeting against the body. Adrian let his eyes rest on the frosted edges of the windshield, crystals forming patterns like veins. He traced one absent-mindedly with his gaze, then set his thermos down. For a moment it was almost peaceful, cocooned inside a metal shell, the storm raging beyond. Then through the muted roar of snow came a sound. 3 sharp knocks. They rang out against the windshield, deliberate, close, like someone's knuckles. Rapping on glass, Adrian froze, his breath caught in his throat. He stared straight ahead, every hair on his arms lifting. His mind scrambled for explanation. Ice shifting? Branches? No. Too clean, too intentional. Knock, knock, knock. His eyes flicked left, right, scanning the blizzard beyond the glass. But there was nothing. Just endless white swirling violently under the beams of his headlights. No figure, no shadow, no shape that could account for the sound. Jesus Christ, he muttered, exhaling hard. He shook his head, forcing a nervous laugh, and rubbed his eyes. Cabin fever, that was all. A tired brain filling the silence with phantom noises. But then he leaned forward, peering at the frosted windshield. There, in the condensation, a shape spread slowly outward. A handprint. It formed on the inside of the glass. Adrian jerked back, slamming against the seat. His own hand trembled as he raised it, pressing against the glass near the imprint. His palm was swallowed easily by the shape. It was larger than his, broader, the fingers impossibly long, and it hadn't been there before. His pulse hammered in his throat. He told himself he had to breathe, had to stay rational. Maybe he'd leaned closer, fogged the glass, and his imagination twisted it into a shape. Yes, that had to be it. His nerves, the storm, the exhaustion. Nothing more. He wiped his sleeve across the windshield, erasing the frost. When he lowered his arm, the glass was clear again. The storm raged on, uncaring, the flakes hissing as they met the hot surface of the hood. Adrian turned the radio dial again, desperate for distraction. A burst of static gave way to a man's voice, but it wasn't singing. It was whispering, low and indistinct, as if muttered right beside him. His hand recoiled from the knob. The whisper faded, swallowed by static. Then the station snapped, back into warped country music as though nothing had happened. A trickle of dread slid down Adrian's spine. He looked back at the windshield. Frost was already crawling back over the glass. The handprint bloomed again. This time he watched it form. Slow, deliberate, pressing outward as though someone inside the glass was reaching toward him. He scrambled for the door handle, half thinking he should get out, breathe fresh air, but the thought of stepping into the storm was unbearable. Outside was worse, dark, cold, endless. His breath fogged the cab, too fast, too shallow. "It's not real," he said aloud, trying to hear his own voice, trying to drown out the hammering silence. "It's just the storm messing with my head." Just the knock, knock, knock. The sound exploded again, rattling the glass inches from his face. He flinched so violently that coffee sloshed across the console. His hand shot to the ignition, twisting the key hard. The engine roared louder, headlights blazing into the void. Without thinking, he slammed the truck into gear and jerked back onto the road. The tires screamed against the ice as the truck lurched forward. He clutched the wheel, eyes wide, heart tearing against his ribs. The road vanished beneath him, but he kept driving faster as though speed alone could tear him free. The storm swallowed everything. Yet behind him, in his imagination, in his dread, he swore he could hear something keeping pace. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, vague shapes moving in the blur of snow. Once, a figure seemed to stand, just beyond the shoulder, impossibly tall, its outline black against the white. When his headlights struck it, the shape dissolved into swirling flakes. He didn't blink. Couldn't blink. Every second felt like the moment before impact. The radio flared with static again, the whispering voice threading through. This time he caught a word, or thought he did. Stop. His hands tightened. Hell no. But then the windshield began to frost over faster than the defroster could melt it. The crystals spread from the center outward, spiraling into shapes. Not random patterns, but symbols, circles, jagged lines, something carved by intent. And beneath them, handprints, dozens of them overlapping, pressing outward as though a crowd was trapped just beyond the glass. Adrian shouted, slamming his fist against the dashboard. The truck fishtailed, the back end swinging wildly before catching again. He nearly lost control, but instinct kept him on the road. The high beams flashed over another road sign, but the words were obscured by frost. He didn't know how far he'd gone, or where he was anymore. The knocking started again. Not 3 this time, but continuous furious pounding. The glass trembling under the weight of it. He screamed, the sound ragged, animal, raw. His breath filled the cab in clouds, his skin slick with cold sweat. He thought the glass might shatter. Then it stopped. Silence rushed in, heavier than the storm. The windshield cleared slowly, the frost retreating until only his own reflection stared back at him, wide-eyed, terrified, ghostly. He gasped, chest heaving, clinging to the steering wheel like it might vanish. For a long moment, there was nothing. Only the truck, the storm, his ragged breathing, then faintly from the back seat, a single deliberate knock. Adrian's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The cab was empty. Just the duffel bag, the Polaroid photo, shadows. But the glass was fogging right there on the side window. Slowly, a handprint spread outward, larger than the one before. He spun the wheel without thinking, the truck careening onto a side road he hadn't noticed until now. The headlights carved through trees that pressed in tight, branches clawing the roof. Snow smothered the trail, but he drove anyway, tires grinding through drifts. Branches whipped past the windshield like reaching arms. Frost crept again across the glass, the symbols twisting like veins. The radio shrieked, the whispering voice breaking into laughter that wasn't laughter at all. It filled the cab, low and guttural, echoing in his skull. He drove blind, desperate, praying for a town, a cabin, a light. Anything human. But the trees only grew thicker, darker. The handprints spread across every window now, pressing from within. From outside, impossible to tell. His breath hitched. He swore he felt the air shift like someone was in the cab with him, sitting just out of sight. He didn't dare look. The road ended abruptly in a snowbank. The truck skidded, slammed nose first, and jolted to a stop. Adrian was thrown forward, the seatbelt catching him, his chest searing with pain. The headlights cut into the trees, illuminating nothing but white trunks and shadows beyond. For a moment, silence again. Then, knock, knock, knock. This time, it came from the inside of his windshield, inches from his face. The frost bloomed instantly, forming not a handprint but the impression of a face pressing outward, features distorted against the glass. Mouth open, eyes hollow, larger than human, Adrian screamed and shoved the door open, stumbling into the storm. Snow swallowed his boots, the wind tearing his voice away. He didn't look back at the truck, couldn't. He ran blindly into the trees, branches tearing his coat, his lungs burning with cold. The forest consumed him, shadows shifting between the trunks. He staggered, fell, dragged himself up again until his body gave out. He collapsed against a tree, chest heaving, eyes stinging. In the distance, through the snow, headlights flickered. His truck, still idling, still waiting. And against the windshield. In the glow of those lights, a hand pressed outward, slowly, deliberately, larger than his own. Adrian closed his eyes, unable to watch. When the storm cleared by morning, the truck was found empty, engine dead, doors open, snow piled against the seats. No footprints trailed away. Only the windshield remained frosted, a single handprint frozen in the glass. Impossibly, large, too deep to be human, no one ever drove that road alone again. The sky over the Alaskan highway was an ink-black canvas brushed with frost, each star sharp and distant as though carved from ice. The Whitman family had been driving for hours, their silver SUV rumbling down a lonely road that cut through the endless expanse of snowbound forest. Inside, the heater hummed low, filling the cabin with the dry warmth that made their cheeks glow red against the window's chill. Thomas Whitman, a truck mechanic turned reluctant winter traveler, kept his eyes on the narrow strip of asphalt ahead. His wife, Leah, leaned against the passenger seat with a thermos of coffee clutched in her mittened hands, sipping between soft sighs. In the back seat, their daughter, Emily, a sharp-eyed 12-year-old, had her face pressed to the window. She had been quiet most of the evening, her breath fogging small circles against the cold glass. "It's supposed to happen tonight," Emily whispered suddenly. "The northern lights. We might see them soon." Thomas gave a small grin, his tired eyes shifting briefly toward the rear view. "If we're lucky, kiddo. The forecast said clear skies. Keep watch." Leah chuckled softly. "She's been talking about this the whole trip. Aurora Borealis, like it's magic." Emily smiled, faintly, but her gaze never left the shifting darkness beyond the glass. Trees passed like frozen sentinels, their branches heavy with snow. Every so often, the headlights caught on the glitter of ice along the road's edge, throwing white sparks into the night. They had been on this road for nearly 40 minutes without another car in sight. The silence outside seemed absolute, the world blanketed in an almost sacred stillness. Only the crunch of tires against packed snow and the steady drone of the engine gave the illusion of movement through a land otherwise untouched. It was Leah who first gasped. "Tom, look." Thomas slowed the SUV, his brow furrowing as he followed her gaze. Up ahead, through the skeletal fingers of the trees, the sky shimmered with pale green light. It began faint, like a gauzy veil, then deepened into swirls of emerald that danced across the horizon. Purple rippled through the folds, bending and folding like silk in a phantom wind. "Emily," Leah whispered, shaking her daughter's shoulder. "Look." The girl pressed both palms to the glass, her eyes widening. "It's real. It's really real." Thomas slowed the vehicle to a crawl, then pulled over onto the shoulder where the road widened slightly. The SUV's headlights stretched out into a powdery drift of snow before cutting off abruptly into the forest's shadow. He shifted into park and killed the engine, and in an instant, the world went still. They stepped out into the biting cold, their boots crunching deep into the snow. The air was sharp and clean, burning in their lungs. Above them, the aurora unfurled in great curtains of color, rippling silently across the heavens. It was mesmerizing, too vast to comprehend, like looking into the pulse of the universe itself. Leah's breath trembled. "It's beautiful." Thomas draped an arm around her shoulder, pulling her close. Emily spun in slow circles, her face tilted skyward, lost in awe. For a few minutes, they said nothing at all, letting the silence of the world and the celestial fire above consume them. Then Emily froze. "Dad." Her voice was small, hesitant. "What's that?" Her mittened hand pointed skyward. Both parents followed her gesture. At first, Thomas saw only the shifting veil of green and violet, a cosmic tide that shimmered across the stars. But then, yes, there was something else. A shape. Against the river of light, a silhouette moved. It wasn't like the other wavering patterns. This was darker, sharper. A tall figure, elongated, striding with impossible grace across the curtain of aurora, as though the light itself were a stage. It had no color, no substance, just a void against the brilliance. Leah's breath hitched. It's just an illusion, a shadow. The lights do that sometimes. But Emily shook her head, her lips parting in silent refusal. It's walking. The figure shifted again, distinctly separate from the swirls around it. For a moment it seemed to pause, tilting as though to look down, to notice them. And in that instant, the colors faltered, dimming briefly, as though the heavens themselves recoiled from the shape's presence. Thomas swallowed hard. All right, we've seen enough. Time to go. They turned back toward the SUV, their boots dragging furrows into the untouched snow. The cold seemed sharper now, cutting through coats, and scarves worming into their bones. Thomas tried not to look back up at the lights, but he felt the weight of something unseen pressing against the nape of his neck. When they reached the vehicle, he froze. Their footprints were gone. The snow around the SUV was smooth, freshly fallen, unbroken, except for the ones they had made just now, returning. Every trace of their arrival had been erased, but not entirely. Encircling the SUV was a ring of depressions in the snow, large, uneven, heavy, as though something with long strides had walked around it again and again, pacing with patience. The tracks were deeper than theirs, as though whatever made them carried more weight, or lingered longer in each step. Leah's voice broke into a whisper. Tom, we didn't do that. Thomas hurried them into the car, his hands fumbling against the frozen handle before wrenching the door open. Emily scrambled in first, followed by Leah, and he slammed the door shut behind them. The cabin filled with the sound of their breaths, harsh and ragged, clouding the cold air inside. He twisted the ignition. The engine groaned, stuttered, then roared reluctantly to life. Headlights sliced into the snow, illuminating the untouched road ahead. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Too normal. But in the glow of those beams, just beyond the edge of light, a shadow stretched across the snow. A tall, still figure standing at the tree line. Its form was the same silhouette they had seen in the sky. Black, sharp, wrong. It didn't move. Thomas pressed the accelerator. The SUV lurched forward, tires crunching, throwing up powder as it surged down the highway. The figure vanished in the side mirror, swallowed by the dark. But the silence that followed was worse. For miles, no one spoke. The aurora continued its dance above, a mocking beauty now, casting faint light across the road. Thomas kept his eyes forward, knuckles white around the wheel, while Leah clutched Emily's hand so tightly the girl winced. The radio crackled suddenly. Static flared, then dipped low, warbling with distortion. A faint voice bled through, broken and hollow. Don't stop. Then it dissolved again, the speakers spitting static before going dead entirely. Emily whimpered. It's in the car. Leah twisted toward her. Don't say that. But even Leah felt it, the weight in the cabin, as though another presence had settled among them, unseen but undeniable. A chill slithered along the back of her neck, colder than the air outside. Thomas refused to look in the mirror. He drove faster, the SUV shuddering against patches of ice, the road bending in endless black curves. The aurora pulsed brighter overhead, bathing the forest in eerie green, shadows lengthening and shrinking across the snow. And then, something brushed the rear window. Not snow, not ice. A hand. A smear across the glass, blacker than night, lingering even as the car sped forward. Emily screamed. Leah turned just in time to see it. a palm-shaped void pressed against the window. No detail, no flesh, just absence. And then it was gone, leaving only a fogged imprint that faded into nothing. Thomas floored the accelerator. The SUV hurtled forward, engine straining, tires squealing against slick asphalt. The lights ahead blurred, the forest a rushing tunnel of shadows. But no matter how fast he drove, the weight inside remained. By the time they reached the faint glow of a distant gas station, the aurora had dimmed into a pale green haze. Thomas swerved into the lot, slamming the brakes, the SUV skidding slightly before coming to rest beneath a flickering lamp. For a long time, they sat in silence, the only sound their breathing, shallow and uneven. Finally, Thomas turned. "We're safe now. Whatever that was, it's gone." But Emily was staring at the snow outside the station lights, her face pale. "No," she whispered. Thomas followed her gaze. Around the SUV, circling it once again, were fresh tracks, deeper this time, closer, and there were no other cars. No, footprints leading away. The family huddled together inside the vehicle, the heater struggling to fight the cold. Beyond the glass, the snow fell gently, covering the tracks bit by bit. But no matter how much snow came, Thomas knew he'd never forget their shape, nor the way the aurora had dimmed when the figure noticed them. When dawn finally broke, they left the gas station silent, too shaken to speak. But even in daylight, with the road stretching clear ahead, Thomas couldn't bring himself to check the rearview mirror, because some part of him was certain that if he did, he'd see it sitting there just behind his daughter, and he wasn't sure he'd have the strength to keep driving. The road stretched endlessly before him, a silver ribbon carved through Alaska's frozen wilderness. Dean McCarthy had been driving trucks for nearly 20 years, and still, the quiet of these midnight routes sometimes unsettled him. The hum of the engine was constant, steady, but every so often it seemed to vanish into the vast silence pressing in from the snowfields. His headlights cut a tunnel through the storm, flakes swirling like ash, and beyond that was nothing, just the emptiness of mountains and dark forests under a sky smothered in cloud. A styrofoam cup of truck stop coffee steamed beside him, wedged into the console, and an old Merle Haggard tape played low from the dash. Dean tapped the steering wheel in rhythm, his thick gloves creaking, trying to keep his mind sharp after hours behind the wheel. A thermos of soup rattled in the passenger seat. His daughter, Claire, had packed it that morning, fussing over him, the way she always did before a long haul. She was 19 now, but still left handwritten notes in his lunch bag. "Stay safe, Dad. See you Sunday." He smiled faintly at the memory and took another sip of bitter coffee. The heat burned his throat, and for a moment he felt anchored. Just a man doing his job, hauling timber from Anchorage down to Juneau. The snow made the trip slower than usual, but that was nothing new. He'd been through blizzards, whiteouts, even seen moose wander across the road like apparitions. Nothing rattled him anymore. And yet somewhere past mile marker 143, Dean began to notice a change. The air seemed heavier, the snow quieter. The tape sputtered, distorted, and finally cut into static. He slapped the deck with a gloved hand, but the radio stayed dead, hissing faintly like breath in his ears. Outside, the storm thinned, revealing the skeletal frame of a highway overpass rising from the dark. He leaned forward, squinting through the glass. That's when he saw her. A figure stood on the overpass, alone, motionless against the night sky. A girl. At least, she looked like one from this distance. Her white dress whipped violently in the wind, though the air around Dean's cab was still. Long hair, black as ink, streamed across her face. She didn't wave, didn't move, just stared down at the truck as he passed beneath. For a heartbeat, their eyes seemed to lock, though how he could be sure he didn't know. Dean grunted, shifting in his seat. "Hell of a night to be out," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Kids sometimes dared each other to stand on the bridges at night. Stupid, reckless. But there was something off here, something he couldn't quite explain. A mile later, his headlights washed over the roadside curve and his gut went cold. The girl was standing there on the shoulder, her dress still twisting in an invisible wind. Dean's foot twitched on the brake, but instinct took over. He gunned the engine instead, roaring past without stopping. His heart slammed in his chest, each beat a hammer against his ribs. He caught a flash of her face, pale, hollow-eyed, mouth parted as though she were whispering his name. Then, a slam against the driver's side window. Dean jerked, swerving half across the lane. A pale hand pressed flat against the glass, leaving streaks of frost that spiderwebbed outward. He could see the bluish veins beneath her skin, the cracked nails scraping faintly as she dragged her fingers down. And then, nothing. The hand was gone. The road ahead stretched empty. Dean cursed aloud, fighting to steady his breathing. He gripped, the wheel tight enough that his knuckles ached, but the truck stayed true, barreling through snow and shadow. It had to be exhaustion. He'd been driving 14 hours straight after all. Maybe he dozed at the wheel, dreamed it. That would explain the overpass, the roadside girl, the handprint. His mind playing tricks, weaving hallucinations out of white lines and fatigue. But when he dared glance left, the frost lingered on the glass, delicate tendrils curling outward like frozen veins. He kept driving. The world outside felt wrong now, distorted. The storm muffled all sound, so that even his tires seemed too quiet on the slick pavement. Shadows shifted in the tree line, keeping pace with the truck, darting just beyond the beam of his headlights. Once, he thought he saw her again, pale, dress flickering between branches, moving as though the forest itself parted to let her through. Dean muttered to himself, old trucker habits surfacing. Don't stop for nothing. He'd told rookies the same thing, never stop on these roads at night. Too easy to slide into a ditch, too easy to get stranded where no tow could reach until morning. But this wasn't about snow or ice. This was about something he couldn't name, pressing closer with every mile. The tape deck sputtered back to life suddenly. But it wasn't Merle Haggard's voice that filled the cab. It was a whisper, low, crackling, layered over static. Words he couldn't make out. He slammed the eject button, but the tape stayed locked. The whispering grew louder. A chorus of overlapping voices all hissing his name. Dean. His breath fogged the cab. The heater was still on, but his skin prickled with cold. The frost on the window spread, thin lines etching across the glass until it seemed the whole truck was encased in ice. He swiped at it, desperate to see the road, but the frost bloomed back instantly. And then, movement. She was beside him, keeping pace with the truck, her bare feet dragging soundlessly over the snow, her head lolled against her shoulder, hair plastered to her face. Her lips moved soundlessly at first, then parted in a scream he could not hear, until it cut through the static like a blade. A shriek filled the cab, so sharp it rattled the mirrors. Dean slammed the brakes, the rig fishtailing across the empty highway. The trailer groaned, tires screeching, the whole vehicle shuddering under the strain. He fought the wheel, muscles burning, until the truck skidded to a stop sideways across both lanes. Silence. Snow drifted down around him, soft and slow. His pulse thundered in his ears. He wiped sweat from his brow and dared to look out the window. Nothing. The road stretched empty, the tree line dark and still. No girl, no figure. Only the long smear of his own tire marks cutting through fresh snow. Dean swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe. He had to keep going. Sitting still out here was worse than moving. He eased the truck back into gear, wheels crunching over the icy pavement, and pressed forward. The cab smelled faintly of earth now, damp and heavy, as though the forest itself had crept inside. Mile after mile passed, each signpost warped by shadow until the numbers seemed unreadable. Dean's eyelids felt heavy, not with fatigue but with dread, as though something weighed on him from within. He thought of Claire, her handwriting on the note, her worry. He gripped the wheel tighter. Just make it through the night. Just get to Juneau. The overpass appeared again. Dean's stomach dropped. He recognized it. The same cracked pillars, the same rusted beams, standing in the middle of nowhere. And there she was, waiting on top, dress flailing in the phantom wind. He didn't slow. He barreled beneath it, eyes fixed on the road. But when he looked up into the rearview mirror, she was gone. The static returned, filling the cab like a storm. Frost exploded across the windshield, blinding him. He slammed the defroster, but the vents howled with freezing air, colder than anything outside. His breath plumed white, fingers stiffening on the wheel. And then the hand came again. This time, it pressed against the inside of the windshield. Dean screamed, jerking back as the pale handprint spread, frost spiraling outward from its touch. He could see her face behind it now, pressed against the glass, eyes wide and black, mouth grinning impossibly wide. The sound of fingernails dragging against ice filled the cab. He stomped the gas, engine roaring, trying to outrun what was already inside. The girl's face smeared across the glass as though the windshield were water, her features distorting, melting, reforming. The shrieking returned, so loud it shook his bones. Dean swerved blindly, headlights cutting through snow. The truck hurtling forward at deadly speed. The trees blurred into streaks, the road vanished beneath spinning tires. For a moment he thought he saw another rig coming toward him, headlights blazing, horn blaring. But when he braced for impact, the road was empty again. The girl's face dissolved into frost, then faded. The windshield cleared, the static cut off. Dean slowed gradually, hands trembling, until the truck rolled to a cautious crawl. The snow fell gentle now, blanketing the highway in silence. He drove on until the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky a bruised gray. His body ached. His mind reeled. But the road ahead was quiet again. He pulled into a rest stop just outside Juneau, killed the engine, and sat there in silence. The frost had melted from the windows. The tape deck was still. Everything looked normal, untouched. And yet on the inside of the windshield, just above the dash, a single handprint remained. Pale, slender, unmistakable. Dean reached out, heart hammering, and touched it with his glove. The glass burned with cold. When he pulled away, the frost clung to his fingertips. He never spoke of it. Not to Claire, not to the men at the truck stop who swapped stories over cheap coffee. But years later, when he drove that stretch of highway, again he slowed near the overpass, eyes scanning the snow. There was no girl, no figure in white, but the handprint still haunted his glass, no matter how many times he wiped it clean. And sometimes, late at night when the road grew too quiet, he swore he heard her whisper his name again, rising from the static carried on the storm. The two-lane highway stretched endlessly ahead of him, a silver ribbon of asphalt buried beneath layers of snow and ice. The world outside the windshield was smothered in a heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic slap of wipers struggling to keep pace with the storm. Robert Hayes leaned forward over the steering wheel, squinting into the blur of white. The cab of his rig smelled faintly of burnt coffee and diesel, warmth bleeding from the vents just enough to fog the edges of the glass. His thermos sat in the cup holder, lukewarm now, but he kept sipping anyway, if only to trick his body into thinking he wasn't so tired. He had been on the road for 14 hours straight, running deliveries across Alaska's interior, and the fatigue was beginning to take its toll. His eyes burned, lids fluttering every so often, and the muscle in his jaw twitched each time he forced himself awake. The CB radio was quiet, just static in the background. He turned the dial, searching for a voice, some other trucker braving the night, but the storm had swallowed the airwaves. The only sound he could depend on was the low rumble of the diesel engine, a steady companion against the isolation. Outside, the forest pressed close to the road. Towering pines bent under the weight of snow, branches hanging low and heavy, their shadows flickering like figures every time his headlights swept past. He tried to ignore the tricks of the light, told himself it was nothing but branches and imagination. On the passenger seat, his logbook lay open, pen resting in the crease. He had written in blocky, weary letters, Fairbanks to Anchorage, no stops until sunrise. But even as he stared at those words, his stomach growled and his bones ached for rest. He needed a place to stop, even just for a few minutes, when the neon appeared through the whiteout. He thought for a moment that he was dreaming. A splash of red and blue lights pierced the storm, glowing faintly ahead. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, and it was still there. A sign, tall and swaying in the wind. Red Haven Roadhouse. Below the name, a simple promise. Food. Coffee. Beds. Relief surged through him, warm and sudden. He guided the truck carefully into the lot, tires crunching over frozen gravel. The storm seemed to ease here, the snow falling lighter, almost as if the roadhouse itself was pushing it back. The building stood sturdy and old-fashioned, wrapped in neon tubing that hummed faintly in the still night. Behind the frosted windows, light glowed amber and inviting. For the first time in hours, Robert felt the weight on his chest begin to lift. He parked near the entrance and killed the engine. Silence rushed in, deafening after so many hours of machinery. The air was bitterly cold when he stepped out, boots sinking into snow crust. He pulled his coat tight and hurried across the lot, boots crunching, breath steaming. The neon flickered slightly as he approached, a wavering pulse like a heartbeat. He grabbed the door handle, pulled it open, and stepped into warmth. At first, the place seemed perfect. The roadhouse smelled of frying bacon, strong coffee, and wood smoke. Golden light spilled from hanging lamps, casting soft shadows across the booths. A jukebox in the corner glowed blue, though its speakers were silent. His boots squeaked against the linoleum as he entered, his shoulders loosening for the first time in miles. Then he noticed the people. Every booth was full. Men and women sat in neat rows, hunched over plates of food, steaming mugs, half-empty glasses. But none of them moved. Forks hung halfway to mouths. Burgers sat untouched. A woman's hand was frozen mid-pour, the coffee in her carafe suspended in an impossible arc. Their eyes, God, their eyes, stared straight ahead, glassy and empty, reflecting the overhead lights like doll's eyes. Robert stopped dead in the center of the room, his breath catching in his throat. He felt his heart slam against his ribs, a sharp pulse of adrenaline cutting through the fog of exhaustion. "Hello?" He tried, his voice too loud in the silence. Not a head turned. Not a single breath disturbed the air. The roadhouse was warm, but a chill spread through him all the same. He took a hesitant step backward, his boots squealing softly. A man in the nearest booth sat stiffly, his lips parted in a frozen smile, teeth catching the light in a way that made Robert's stomach churn. He turned toward the counter, hoping maybe, just maybe, someone was behind it, someone alive, someone who could explain this. But the stools were occupied too, each by another unmoving figure. A man with his hat still on, a trucker like himself, sat with a cigarette resting on his lip. The ember glowed faintly, but the smoke hung in the air, unmoving like a photograph suspended in glass. Robert's hands trembled. He muttered something, he didn't even know what, and stumbled back toward the door. His body moved faster than his brain, survival instinct taking over. His fingers clawed at the handle, pulled it open, and then the lights cut out. Darkness slammed into the roadhouse like a physical force. The neon sign outside blinked and died, plunging the building into blackness. For a heartbeat, Robert couldn't breathe. Then the silence was broken, not by voices, not by footsteps, but by the faint crackle of something burning. He spun, his eyes adjusting slowly. The booths were empty. Every single figure was gone. The tables were bare, plates vanished, glasses missing. Where warm golden light had filled the room, only the red glow of embers remained. The smell hit him. Charred wood, smoke, the acrid tang of something long burned. He staggered backward through the doorway, chest heaving. The snow bit at his skin again, cruel and sharp. He turned, expecting to see the neon, the building lit warmly against the night. Instead, he saw ruins. The roadhouse stood blackened and skeletal, its walls caved in, roof collapsed. Ash drifted in the wind like snowflakes, mingling with the storm. Charred beams jutted upward like bones. The windows were shattered, their edges melted and warped, and yet he could swear he still smelled bacon and coffee. He could swear he still heard the faint hum of neon somewhere deep in the rubble. Robert's legs nearly gave out. He stumbled to his truck, scrambled inside, and slammed the lock down on the door. His breath came in sharp gasps, fogging the windshield. He turned the key and the engine roared reluctantly to life. His headlights cut across the lot, illuminating only ruin and snow. But for one instant, just one, he saw them again. Shapes in the windows, silhouettes of men and women sitting calmly in their booths, heads tilted in eerie unison. They flickered with the light, then were gone. His tires spun on the icy gravel before catching. He tore out of the lot, the trailer swaying behind him. The road stretched out ahead, black and endless, the storm still raging. He didn't look back. The miles passed in a blur, his hands locked in a death grip on the wheel. But even as he drove, his thoughts circled like vultures. He had been there. He had seen them. The warmth, the food, the people, then the ruin. Which one was real? He glanced in the mirror more than once, half expecting to see headlights following. Him, or worse, the faint glow of neon in the distance. But the road was empty, only snow and forest and darkness. When dawn finally broke, pale light spilling over the mountains, Robert pulled into a small roadside diner, shaking, exhausted, desperate for proof of something real. Inside, the people moved normally. Coffee steamed upward. Smoke curled from cigarettes. Voices murmured. He almost wept with relief. But as the waitress poured his coffee, he noticed her hands. The liquid streamed smoothly, but for a single, impossible instant the arc of coffee seemed to freeze mid-air, glistening like glass. He blinked and it was normal again. Robert sat in silence, his cup trembling in his hand. Somewhere deep in the forest behind him, the Red Haven Roadhouse waited. And sometimes, on nights when the snow falls heaviest, truckers say they still see the neon glow through the trees. Just for a moment, just long enough to make them wonder, long enough to make them stop, long enough for them to never be seen again. The road was little more than a scar through endless white, a thin strip of asphalt swallowed by snowbanks taller than a man. Nathan Reeves leaned forward over the steering wheel, the defroster hissing against the windshield as flakes drifted down from a sky that seemed to have erased the stars. He had been driving for hours, the hum of tires on frozen pavement mingling with the low drone of a country station, the announcer's voice fading in and out as the radio strained against the wilderness. The dashboard clock glowed 12:42 a.m. He sipped from the dented thermos at his side, coffee gone lukewarm, metallic at the edges, and tapped his fingers to keep rhythm with a tune he only half remembered. He wasn't supposed to be on this stretch of highway at this hour. The plan had been to stop at Fairbanks before the storm rolled in, but a late delivery in Anchorage had delayed him, and Nathan hated wasting time. He always told himself the road was easier at night. No tourists, no slow-moving RVs, no state, troopers lurking for an easy ticket. Just him, the truck, and the wide Alaskan dark. Yet tonight the dark felt different. It pressed against his windshield like a living thing, deeper than usual, as though the moon had gone missing and the snow swallowed every scrap of light. His daughter's scarf was tied around the rearview mirror, a faded pink knit she'd left in the cab last spring. He liked having it there. It reminded him that there was still a home waiting, even if it was thousands of miles away. He rubbed his thumb across the wheel, listening to the tires whine against patches of ice. A long sigh escaped him. The isolation was bearable, the miles tolerable, but only so long as the truck kept running. At 1:07 a.m. it didn't. The engine coughed once, twice, then stuttered into silence. Headlights flickered, dimmed, and left him drowning in a night so absolute it felt carved from stone. Nathan swore under his breath, twisting the ignition. Nothing. Just the echo of cold air. He tried again, pumping the pedal, listening to the futile click. A chill settled into the cab as the heater died. Damn it. He smacked the wheel. The nearest town was 30 miles back, the next nearly 50 ahead. No service on his phone, no cars on the road. He sat there for a minute, breath fogging the cab, debating. Then, with a grunt, He shoved open the door. Snow crunched under his boots as he stepped out, pulling his jacket tighter. The silence was startling, not just quiet, hollow. The kind of silence that swallowed even the sound of his own heartbeat. The air was sharp with cold, so clear it burned his lungs. He walked a few paces from the truck, stretching his legs. It wasn't uncommon for rigs to stall in the cold. Sometimes you just needed to give it a rest, let the fluids shift, then try again. That was what he told himself. Just a walk, a few deep breaths, and the engine would roar back like always. His boots left prints in the thin crust of snow. He noticed how the headlights cast a dim glow around the truck. Not much, but enough to stretch his shadow across the whiteness. Long, spindly, trailing behind him like a black ribbon. He lifted his arm. The shadow lifted. He bent at the waist. It mirrored him. Ordinary. Until it wasn't. As Nathan paced slowly down the roadside, his shadow stretched further than the light should allow, distorting across the snow as though the ground itself had flattened for it. He paused. The shadow did not. It kept walking, long legs carrying it forward even as Nathan stood frozen, breath misting in disbelief. He turned sharply. The shadow turned, but a beat too late. Its arms swung with a strange delay, fluid yet wrong, like a puppet tugged by loose strings. Nathan blinked hard, rubbed his eyes. Fatigue. That had to be it. His nerves playing tricks. But when he took a cautious step backward, the shadow didn't follow. It strode forward instead, crossing the snow in silence, passing him, stretching ahead like it had somewhere else to be. Nathan's breath caught. He pivoted to keep his eyes on it. His pulse thudded loud in his ears. It slowed, as though aware of him watching. Then, impossibly, it turned. Not his body. His shadow. It faced him. Nathan stumbled back until his spine pressed against the frozen metal of the truck. The shadow cocked its head, a broken mimicry of curiosity. For a heartbeat, it stood still. Then it began to walk again, but this time in a wide, deliberate arc. Its black length circled across the snow, bending, curving, closing in. Nathan whispered to himself, No, you're tired. That's all. Tired. He blinked hard again, but when he opened his eyes, the shape was closer. The arc had tightened. The silence of the night became unbearable. He could hear his breath rasping, the crunch of his boots as he edged back. The shadow's steps made no sound. Yet he swore he could feel it like pressure in the air, as though the world shifted each time it moved. He lunged for the cab, yanking the door open with numb fingers. He scrambled inside, slammed the door, and twisted the key in the ignition. Once, twice. A cough, then silence. He cursed, pounding the dash. Come on, damn it. The engine wheezed, sputtered, then caught. Relief flooded him as the headlights burst alive. But when the beams cut across the snow, there was no shadow at his feet. Only Nathan himself, trembling inside the cab. He exhaled, half laughing, half sobbing. It was gone. Just a trick of the light. Exhaustion, darkness, cold. All conspiring to rattle his nerves. He shoved the truck into gear and pressed the gas. The wheels spun, caught, and the truck lurched forward. For 10 miles, he kept glancing in the mirrors. Snow hissed beneath the tires. Nothing followed. The scarf swung gently from the mirror, steady as his heartbeat slowed. He dared to believe it was over. Then the radio crackled. Static bled through the country song, then a warped voice whispered something too faint to understand. Nathan leaned closer. The words repeated, low, stretched, distorted, as though someone spoke from the other side of water. He turned the dial. The static followed. Stop, he muttered. He twisted it off completely. Silence filled the cab once more. A glance in the rear view made his stomach drop. There it was. Not behind him on the road, but beside him in the glass. His shadow. It wasn't cast on the ground, but standing upright in the reflection, pacing the truck like a man keeping stride with his steps. Blacker than the night, legs moving in perfect rhythm, except its arms swung too wide, shoulders jerking at odd angles. Nathan slammed the brakes. The truck skidded, fishtailing on the ice, tires screaming. He yanked the wheel, fighting it to a stop. His chest heaved. Slowly, he lifted his eyes back to the mirror. The glass showed only his own terrified reflection. He sat there for minutes, shaking, until his breath evened. "Just drive," he whispered. "Drive until morning." He eased the truck forward again, but the night refused to loosen. The road stretched endlessly, snow whipping across the beams. His eyelids felt heavy, nerves shot raw. And still, every reflective surface, the side mirror, the windshield glare, hinted at movement where none should be. A shape walking just beyond the corner of his eye. By the time the sky paled faintly in the east, Nathan had stopped checking the mirrors. He gripped the wheel until his knuckles burned, eyes fixed forward. Every instinct screamed that something was walking beside him, keeping pace, waiting for him to acknowledge it. At dawn, he saw the first sign of a gas station. He nearly wept. He pulled off, tires crunching into the icy lot. The building was small, pale blue paint peeling, but smoke curled from a chimney. A hand-painted sign read "Open." He stumbled inside, greeted by the smell of coffee and wood smoke. A woman behind the counter looked up, smiled politely. "Long night, huh?" Nathan managed a laugh. "You could say that." He poured himself coffee, hands trembling so badly he spilled some. The woman frowned. "You okay?" she asked. He hesitated. Then, voice low, "You ever see something out here? On the road?" Her eyes flicked past him toward the glass door. A strange shadow crossed her face. She said nothing. Nathan turned slowly. His heart stopped. The sun had risen, casting sharp light across the snowy lot. And yet, his shadow lay wrong. Longer than the others, stretching across the snow, circling back toward the door. He dropped the cup, ceramic shattering across the floor. The woman didn't move. She just whispered, "You should leave before it comes inside." Nathan stumbled backward, out the door, into the blinding morning. The shadow moved with purpose now, bending in ways his body never did. He lunged into the truck, slammed the door, and tore out of the lot, snow spraying behind. He didn't look back until miles later. The road curved, the forest pressing close, the sky bright with daylight. Surely it couldn't follow. Shadows belonged to the night, but as his eyes flicked to the mirror, he saw it there. Not behind him, not beside him, but seated in the cab, in the passenger seat, smiling with teeth blacker than the void. Nathan didn't scream. He just drove, hands locked on the wheel, as the endless Alaskan road swallowed him whole. No one ever reported seeing his truck again, and some nights when the moon is gone and the snow erases the world, drivers say they glimpse a long shadow walking beside them, just out of step, just out of time, but only if they dare to look. If you've ever driven the lonely highways of Alaska, you know silence isn't always peaceful. Every bend, every mile marker, hides stories that may never be explained. If these true horror encounters unsettled you tonight, make sure to subscribe for more terrifying journeys into the world's loneliest places. And remember, on the open road, you're never truly alone.